You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. You can read the full notice for your rights and protections at www.boston.org/MPO_NON_DISCRIMINATION. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. After roll call, board members may mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Stella Jordan via the chat box or at SJORDAN@ctps.org or 857-702-3675. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Stella Jordan of the MPO staff at SJORDAN@ctps.org or 857-702-3675. First item on the agenda is introductions. I'm David Moeller. I represent Secretary Gina Fiandaca here. Please call the roll.
Mass DOT seat 2.
This is John Bouchard representing Highway Administrator Jonathan Gulliver.
Mass DOT Highway.
Don Romano here.
MBTA.
Good morning. This is Allie Clayman representing Interim General Manager Gonneville and the MBTA.
Massport.
I do not see Sarah Lee.
Okay, thank you. MEPC.
Good morning. This is Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
MBTA Advisory Board.
Good morning, Brian Kane, MBTA Advisory Board.
Advisory Council.
Leonard Diggins, Advisory Council here. Thank you.
City of Boston BTD.
Good morning. Sorry for the delay. This is Matt Moran, City of Boston BTD.
Thank you. City of Boston BPDA.
Jim Fitzgerald with the BPDA, representing Mayor Wu in the City of Boston.
At-large city, City of Everett.
Morning, Jay Monty, representing Mayor DeMaria in the City of Everett.
At-large city, City of Newton.
Good morning, David Kozis, representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller in the City of Newton.
At-large town, Town of Arlington.
Good morning, this is Claire Ricker. I'm representing the Town of Arlington and Town Manager Sandy Pooler this morning.
At-large town, Town of Brookline.
Morning all, happy Thursday. Rob King, Town of Brookline, representing Town Administrator Charles Carey.
Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville.
Excuse me. Good morning. Tom Bent, City of Somerville, representing Mayor Ballantyne in the Inner Core.
Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton.
Good morning, Austin Scanlon, Town of Acton, representing Magic Subregion.
Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Dennis Giambetti representing Metro West Region and the Mayor Sinski of Framingham.
North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Darlene Nguyen representing the North Shore Task Force and Mayor Michael Cahill.
North Suburban Planning Council, Town of Burlington.
I do not see Melissa Tentopoulos.
Thank you. South Shore Coalition, Town of Hull.
Good morning, Chris Diorio, Town of Hull.
Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Medway.
Do not see Peter Pelletier.
Okay. Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood, Neponset River Regional Chamber.
Steve Olenoff, Trick Subregion.
Great. And our ex officio members, Federal Highway Administration.
Good morning, Ken Miller, Federal Highway Administration.
Great. And Federal Transit Administration.
Don't see any representatives from FTA.
All right, thank you. That calls the roll, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the chair's report. I don't have one, so we'll go directly to the executive director's report. Tegan?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and it's wonderful to see you all again after my time away. So for my report today, I'd like to start off with some staffing updates. If you can go to the next slide. So just as a reminder, we have a number of open positions right now. We have been receiving applications and begun interviewing for those that were out, which are the MPO activities, policy and planning, and multimodal planning and design manager, as well as the program manager for the long range transportation plan. The first bullet here, the data scientist and model developer, is a new posting. So as always, please help us continue to spread the word about these positions and send applicants our way if you think there are any that would be excellent for any of these positions. Also related to staffing, I have one more departure and one more new hire to announce. So first of all, yesterday we said goodbye to Margaret Atkinson. She has been really excelling with us, performing a variety of work for the MPO over the last 3 years. So I wanted to bring up her departure because she did quite a bit of analysis initially as a data analyst with GIS, and was very supportive and an advocate for advancing inclusion and equity in our GIS analysis. And then in 2021, she took on a significant challenge, shifting from a role to a data scientist, and she's been supporting the development of the MPO's new travel demand modeling tools, TDM23. So she's contributed a lot to the agency over her just over 3 years, and we'll miss her, but we'll wish her luck at her next stage with the Lincoln Institute for Land Policy. And then also we are hiring a new principal analyst and travel demand modeler. Her name is Cherry Liu. She'll start in April 10th, and she'll be working in our data analysis and applications group. And she'll be bringing her expertise to the application of our travel demand modeling tools, both to MPO work and also to other work we do on regionally significant planning projects. So for the next slide, I have a few long-range plan and engagement updates. First of all, just related to upcoming activities for the long-range transportation plan, in April, we will be asking you all to help us finalize the funding allocations for the investment programs and also select the projects from the Universe for Inclusion and the LRTP. So please keep that in mind and be ready for those conversations in April. And then in terms of an engagement update, we've had some very exciting attention recently on the MPO study on the Blue Hills that was called Unlocking the Blue Hills. It was recently presented to the MPO, and it looked at the inequity of access to the Blue Hills when driving compared to taking public transit, and proposed several solutions for making the reservation more accessible to Boston residents, particularly by public transit. So I believe there's some links going into the chat. I'll just mention that there was a front page story in the Dorchester Reporter newspaper. And there was also a WBUR daily podcast, The Common, which interviewed our manager of communications and engagement, Sean Rourke, about the study. So they're really great to listen to and to read. And so hopefully you'll check out those links and check out the attention on the MPO's work. And then finally, in terms of engagement, staff just launched a new public survey aimed at collecting feedback about the investment prioritization for the long range plan. So please do what you can to help us advertise the survey and spread it to anybody who wants to fill it out. And a link will be also provided in the chat, I see. Next slide, please. So today's agenda has 3 primary action items. One is improving a work scope for the Blue Bikes, fair equity analysis, the endorsement of Amendment 1 to the federal fiscal year 2023 UPWP. This would propose waiving the public comment period, which would be explained clearly during the presentation. And then the third action item on the agenda is to endorse the final project programming scenario for the federal fiscal year 24 to 28 TIP, which I expect to be the bulk of the conversation today. Next slide. So in terms of upcoming meetings, first of all, I wanted to say that it seems yesterday, Governor Healy signed into law the supplemental budget that included the extension of open meeting law exceptions, which will allow public bodies to meet remotely, continue to meet remotely through March 31st, 2025. So that, of course, does not prevent you, the board, from meeting in person in the coming months, but it does mean that we do not have to plan for in-person quorum next month as we thought we might have to. So we will be able to continue with remote meetings for another 2 years under that law. So the next 2 meetings are scheduled for April 13th, and I wanted to just remind you that it was moved from April 6th. And then we will be returning to the regular first and third Thursday schedule on April 20th. So just note that those will come 1 week apart. And with that, I will answer any questions, Mr. Chair, that anybody has.
Thank you, Tegan. Any questions for Tegan? Seeing none. Next item on the agenda is public comments. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment at this time? If so, please raise your hand. Bill Renault.
Good morning, folks. Bill Renault, Wakefield's town engineer, here to provide comment for our downtown revitalization project. We're still excited to see this important project for our community program within the fiscal 28 scenario 2 and 3 of the draft TIP. The project provides much needed multimodal access between the downtown business area and recreational activities that happen at Lake Quinnipiac. The project also dovetails with MAPC's Mystic Highland Greenway initiative and provides connection to the Wakefield Linfield Rail to Trail, which I believe is programmed for 26 on the STEP. The community has provided overwhelming support for the project in several public meetings and has authorized design funding at 2 separate town meetings. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on the project and appreciate your support for the project.
Thank you. Miguel Perez Luna.
Hi, everyone. My name is Miguel Perez Luna. I'm a transportation planner with the city of Cambridge, and I'm speaking in support of our city's request for funding for electric bikes for the Blue Bike system through the Community Connections Grant. As many of us know, Blue Bikes has proven to be a reliable public transit option in our region. Ridership has rebounded and broken records in the last year. And it's an important piece of the mobility puzzle and relatively inexpensive compared to other transit. And our goal is to make it even more reliable, accessible, sustainable, and modern. We know that when e-bikes have been introduced to other rideshare systems in other cities, ridership has increased and users have opted to use them. E-bikes increase access to bike share in at least 2 ways. They make it easier to use and are more accessible for people who find classic bikes too physically difficult to use. And they also help users travel up hills and travel longer distances in shorter amounts of time. We know that e-bikes are more likely to match trips made by cars, so e-bikes likely generate more of a mode shift than classic bikes. And they help fill gaps in our current system. We are always trying to expand stations, but this could be a quicker approach to help in the meantime. At minimum in Cambridge, we know that only 3 of every 10 Blue Bike stations are within a quarter mile of one of our 6 main transit hubs, so e-bikes do help support last minute travel. Several of our stations are more than a mile from these transit hubs, and so they help residents connect to them. We have full support to implement these from our city's leadership, as well as the city of Boston and all of the Metro Blue Bikes communities, which include Somerville, Brookline, Everett, Arlington, Chelsea, Malden, Medford, Newton, Revere, Watertown, and Salem. We also have support from Mass Bike, the Kendall Square Association, which does see e-bikes as a means to grow employee commute by bike and to reduce congestion and contribute to the Commonwealth's climate goals. So thank you. We believe that as an important regional transit system, we should receive financial support through the form of the Community Connections Grant for the introduction of e-bikes. Thank you.
Thank you. Other commenters at this time? Seeing none. If you have a comment during the meeting, please raise your hand and we will try to call on you. The next item on the agenda is committee chairs reports. Derek Cravat.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to let everybody know that the Unified Planning Work Program Committee will be meeting today, this afternoon at 1 p.m. All are welcome to attend. The meeting materials are posted online on the CTPS meeting calendar webpage. We'll be discussing a list of about 18 discrete study proposals that were received through a combination of a public survey, as well as through CTPS staff and other stakeholders to include in the federal fiscal year 2024 work program for CTPS and MAPC. So hope to see everybody there, and thank you.
Thank you. Jay Monty.
Good morning, the Commission Chair. So the Congestion Management Committee had a meeting last Thursday on the 23rd. And
Thank you.
sorry about that.
No worries.
And we discussed a project to look at or do some case studies on congestion pricing, looking at other regions, other cities. And so we had some great feedback, some great attendance, and we will look to maybe do a follow-up meeting in the coming months as more progress has been made on that project, but it was a very well attended meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Next item on the agenda is the Regional Transportation Advisory Council report. Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we had an extra meeting last Wednesday in order to discuss the scenarios for the tip. And thanks to Ethan for a nice, long, and thorough and helpful presentation. So feeling more prepared for today's meeting. Thanks for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item is the minutes of March 2nd. Can I get a motion in a second to approve the minutes? Please state your name for the record when making the motion. Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, I'll make a motion to approve the March 2nd MPO meeting minutes.
Is there a second? Brian King.
As is my lot in life, I am very happy to second Eric's motion.
Motion having been made and seconded. Are there any comments, changes, questions, or suggestions? Seeing none, please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Ally Clayman,
Ally Clayman, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Matthew Moran,
Matthew Moran, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Monty, yes.
David Kosis,
David Kozis, yes.
Claire Ricker,
Claire Ricker, yes.
Rob King,
Rob King, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Saganowitz, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Wynn, yes.
Chris Diorio,
Chris Diorio, yes.
and we have Tom O'Rourke also for Trick, so either Tom or Steve, who will be voting.
Tom O'Rourke, yes, thank you.
Thank you. And that calls the roll. Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is a work scope for Blue Bike Fare Equity Analysis. Emily Domenico.
Hi, I am Emily DeMonico, staff to the Boston Region MPO and a data analyst at CTPS. Today, I'm here to present a work program for a project called Blue Bikes Fare Equity Analysis. This project is expected to cost $96,310 and to be completed in 12 months. This study is funded by contracts with the cities of Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville, who are three of the Blue Bikes municipal owners. The study is supported in full with non-MPO funding and will not impinge on other MPO work. And study, the Blue Bikes bike share system currently charges riders using a past-based or a per-ride-based fee, where users pay a set cost to access the bike share system regardless of travel distance. Many bike share systems across the United States have incorporated a per-minute fee structure, so a time-based fee structure, particularly with the introduction of e-bikes. The cities of Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville are contracting with CTPS to analyze how potential changes to the Blue Bike fare structure and bike fleet composition will impact riders of underserved population groups, including people of color, people with low incomes, and people with limited English proficiency. This project is planned to span 8 tasks. In task 1 and 2, CTPS will focus on identifying demographic data for Blue Bikes riders. CTPS will develop a methodology to relate trip patterns and bike share ridership data to census demographic data. And then to supplement ridership-based demographic estimates, CTPS will develop a demographic survey to be distributed digitally and in person to bike share riders. We'll use that survey to then verify or augment our ridership-based demographic estimates. Next, in task 3, CTPS will analyze the impacts of fare elasticity on bike share ridership based on literature review and also an analysis of Blue Bike ridership changes due to past fare changes. In task 4, CTPS will focus on modeling the equity impacts of e-bikes. Here, we want to focus on the equity impacts of introducing e-bikes to the bike share system, focusing on the availability of e-bikes throughout the system and the fare structure associated with e-bikes. Next, in task 5, we will model fare change scenarios, and here we'll build a model based on rider level bike share trip patterns that prices travel based on the existing fare structure and projects ridership changes in a proposed fare change scenarios. The modeling process will track impacts to the quantity of trips made, rider minutes traveled, and average fare per trip by demographic group. Finally, in tasks 6, 7, and 8, CTPS will develop an interactive report that can recalculate metrics over time for the municipal clients and document our methodology and provide support to clients when using the interactive report for the remainder of the contract. And with that, I request approval for this work program, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Emily. Questions from members? Seeing and hearing none, can I get a motion in a second to approve as presented today? Eric Barrasso.
Eric Barrasso, I'll make a motion to approve this work scope as presented today.
Is there a second? Lynn Diggins.
I'm happy to second. I've taken my hand down so Brian could get in there, but I'm happy to second it, especially since someone else is paying for a really good study. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Allie Clayman.
Allie Clayman, yes.
We now have Sarah Lee from Massport,
Yes, Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barrasso,
Eric Barrasso, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Matthew Moran,
Matthew Moran, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kosis,
David Kosis, yes.
Claire Ricker,
Claire Ricker, yes.
Rob King,
Rob King, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Zaganowicz, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Chris Diorio,
Chris Diorio, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Great, that calls the roll. Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is an action item for FY 2023 UPWP Amendment Number 1. Srilekha Murthy.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and good morning all. My name is Srilekha Murthy, and today I will be presenting a proposed Amendment 1 to the Federal Fiscal Year 2023 Unified Planning Work Program. At the end of my presentation, I will ask this board to vote to waive the 21-day public comment period and vote to endorse this amendment as presented today. Next slide, please. Amendment 1 to the UPWP proposes the inclusion of an MBTA project, the Red Line Transit Oriented Development District Framework Study. In November of 2022, the MBTA was awarded a grant by the Federal Transit Administration through their pilot program for transit oriented development planning. This study will focus on leveraging concentrated development areas along the Red Line to fund capital development projects. The specific districts include around the Quincy Center Station, Alewife, and Andrew Station, among other potential districts. For more specific information regarding the study, please contact Jennifer Mecca at the T, and I'll drop her contact information in the chat. Next slide, please. This project is fully grant funded, meaning there is a net zero change to the overall budget of the Unified Planning Work Program. This also means that no MPO money is going towards this work. As a reminder, the MPO now has the ability to waive public comment periods as of the federal fiscal year 2023 UPWP, as well as the public engagement plan. Since this work will be done by the MBTA and not the MPO, we are requesting that the board vote to waive the comment period for this amendment and subsequently vote to endorse it as presented. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions?
This is Matt Moran from City of Boston.
Yep.
Given the potential impacts to City of Boston right of way and City of Boston zoning, I want to ask if there might be an opportunity for us to review this in more detail, and maybe if I could request a postponement on this request.
MBTA want to respond?
I'm not sure, I guess, if the person you've been working with, Srilaka, is here. I would need to follow up.
I'm not sure if she is in this meeting.
All right, so there's two ways we could do this. We could either pull this item. Well, I guess there's three ways. We could pull this item. We could approve it over the request of the city, or we could just release this with a 21-day public review process and give the T and the city 21 days to talk to each other. Doesn't matter to me, but Brian, what do you want to do?
It really doesn't matter what I want to do. Trust me. My question, I guess, is, so for more information, we're supposed to contact somebody to take. The write-up on this was like a paragraph, so we didn't get a lot of information. So I guess I'm sympathetic to Boston's plan here. So yeah, let's do 21 days, I guess, if you're asking me, and then we can come back and talk about it. Unless somebody from the T can tell me that would, or from the UPWP folks, that would cause a major headache somehow.
Yeah, so based on my conversations with the T, the goal of getting this amendment done as soon as possible is so they can start developing their scopes and their RFPs as soon as they possibly can. Because this grant was awarded in November and we're just getting to it in March. They are really looking to ramp up their work on this. So that being said, any specific questions on how they're going to approach this work, I think the T is still kind of figuring those details out. And once they're awarded this money, I think they're expecting to begin their project work. Again, I'm not going to speak entirely for the T. This is just based on the conversations that I've had with them.
Mr. Chair, if I might follow up through you, I don't see a reason why the T can't start scoping now while a 21-day public comment period is in place. So I unless you want to table it, Matt, I would suggest we do the 21-day public comment period, come back middle of April, the T can start the work. The districts aren't going to move. The red line's not going to move. So I think we'll be okay.
Matt?
Yeah, I think the 21-day comment period makes sense. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Eric Barassa?
Another alternative, could be that we table this conversation for now, talk about the tip. If someone from the T could come back in like an hour or two who is actually working on this and could then speak to this, maybe we could make a more informed decision at that point. But if that's not doable, then I'm whatever,
Right, but so even then though, Eric, I think Matt's point is the city wants to have a discussion before the MPO says yes. And I mean, so clearly someone at the T filed a grant application, right? There's documentation somewhere that explains this more than a paragraph. They could come and explain it again, but I think what Matt's point is, hey, the city would like to talk about it before the MPO votes on it. But Matt, I'm speaking for you and I shouldn't. So
No, you took the words out of my mouth. You said it perfectly. That's exactly my thought. I think the 21 days would be great for us to be able to sit down with the T and have a conversation about exactly what the parameters are and how we can work with them and how it might impact the city, right of way and city zoning and the things that are around the stations.
John Rourke, you got your hand up.
Yes, I just want to say that so when we do public comment periods, they start the Friday after meetings. And so the public comment period would not be concluded by the April 20th meeting, which is 3 weeks from today. And so the board would not be able to vote on it because the comment period wouldn't be over. One option might be a 2-week public comment period, and then that would leave enough time to compile comments and allow time for the vote on April 20th.
Thank you, Sean.
2 weeks is fine by me as well.
Brian, you want to make a motion?
Let me just, if I might, Mr. Chair, let me suggest to the authority that they also invite our friends from Braintree and Quincy and Cambridge and Somerville to also participate, because the red line does go through other parts of the region. With that said, I'd like to move that we endorse this.
You want to move the
14-day public comment? Nope. Okay.
Going to move that we release this for a 14-day public comment period.
That's what I meant to say. You read my mind. Thank you.
Right? Is there a second? Eric Barassa.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded. Please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Ally Clayman,
Ally Clayman, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Matthew Moran,
Matthew Moran, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Claire Ricker,
Claire Ricker, yes.
Rob King,
Rob King, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Siganowitz,
Austin Siganowitz, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Chris Diorio,
Chris Diorio, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Great, that calls the roll. Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is an action item on the development of the FY 24 to 28 TIP final project programming scenario. Ethan Lapointe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody. My name is Ethan Lapointe, and I am the Transportation Improvement Program Manager for the Boston Region MPO. My presentation this morning will provide an update on the final TIP funding scenarios for consideration by the board for incorporation into the currently in development federal fiscal years 2024 to 2028 TIP. These scenarios representing what new projects MPO staff are requesting for the board to consider to fund in the TIP. If we can go on to the next slide, please. Today's presentation, after I discuss the brief goal for today and do a brief review on the scenarios from the March 16th meeting, I'll be providing an update on some projects currently programmed in the TIP, in addition to a review on MBTA projects that are being considered for funding in both of the new scenarios. These are scenarios 4 and 5, and also MassDOT projects that are also under consideration. At the end of this presentation and following discussion, the board will be asked to select an investment approach based on one of the 2 new scenarios presented today. Again, this being scenario 4, which is being referred to as the fiscal sustainability scenario, and scenario 5, which is the performance scenario, short for performance measures. If we can go on to the next slide just to cover some resources for today. In advance of this presentation, staff provided a list of projects provided by both the MBTA, which was provided at the March 16th meeting initially, and a finalized list from the MassDOT Highway Division for review. Staff also posted the now 5 scenario tables for board consideration, with the main focus of this presentation being the more complete scenarios 4 and 5, which appear at the front of the packet, in addition to a full consolidated project list there. I would also mention as well that staff recently received a letter of support from the Blue Bikes General Counsel this morning, which has also been posted on the meeting calendar and is available for review there. If we can go on to the next slide and the one after. Just as with the March 16th meeting, the goal of today's presentation is to have a more final discussion around the board's preferences for a final programming scenario, such that it may be selected by vote at the end of this presentation and would inform the development of the TIP for its draft release for public review, 21 days, on April 20th. If we can go on to the next slide and the one after that, just to provide a brief review on some of the funding scenarios that were presented at the March 16th meeting. There were 3 different funding scenarios presented to the board, the first being the baseline readiness scenario. This one was actually presented back in February, and what this really was the foundation upon which the subsequent 4 scenarios have been built. This scenario established and indicated how changes in project cost for projects currently programmed in the fiscal 23 to 27 TIP led to significant funding availability across all 5 years in the new TIP cycle, while also accounting for how advanced construction projects, namely larger scale projects whose funding is spread across multiple fiscal years that were programmed in 2027, then had an impact on the new TIP year of 2028, and how those funding obligations kind of impact long-term TIP funding strategy. If we go on to the next slide, we can see how this scenario really panned out as a foundation for the initial funding availability across 6 fiscal years, including the 5 constrained years of the TIP, 24 to 28, and also fiscal year 2023, where there were just some project changes there, including funding increases and readiness adjustments. This table illustrates how there was initially $202,044,118 across all 5 TIP years, for a total approximate funding availability of 29% of all funding. Namely, this funding availability was present across almost all the years of the TIP in a relatively proportionally even amount, ranging from about 19.2% of overall funding up to 36% of overall funding, namely in the out years, as is tradition for a TIP cycle. If we go on to the next slide, there was one consistent factor across the other 2 scenarios that were presented at the March 16th meeting, and that was in the community connections projects. There were initially 6 newly programmed community connections projects discussed at that meeting, being Metro West RTA's Catch Connect microtransit shuttle expansion's 2nd phase, being a service expansion project into 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. in service hours on weekdays for its existing Catch Connect service in Framingham and Natick, Lynn's Broad Street Corridor Transit Signal Priority Project. Medford had a Blue Bikes expansion project for 4 new stations and 25 bikes, and a bicycle parking tier 1 project for priority 1 zones in the city of Medford for 40 racks, and 2 bicycle rack projects in Canton, one for Canton Center, their downtown near the MBTA's Canton Center commuter rail station and Canton Junction stations, and also the Canton Public Schools bike racks program. In addition to these 6, there was also a request covered at the March 16th meeting by the town of Acton to refund a project that had dropped off of the fiscal 22 to 26 TIP, which was the Acton Commuter Rail Parking Management System project, which is proposed in scenario 4 and 5 for reprogramming in fiscal year 2024 to the amount of $15,000, which fits within the remaining set aside for the Community Connections program. As the board may recall from previous multiple discussions this past spring, after accounting for continuing funding obligations for shuttle projects programmed in previous TIPs, namely the 22-26, 23-27 TIPs, there remained $641,495 out of the $2.5 million set aside within that program, which is less than 25%. And thus these projects recommend what could fit in that fiscal constraint remaining after the ongoing obligations. If we go on to the next slide, and as I mentioned, those community connections projects were consistent across each of the 2 scenarios presented at the March 16th meeting. This scenario incorporates those community connections projects, but also serves as the foundation for the next two final ones, being scenario 4 and scenario 5. This is the scoring criteria scenario. This one prioritized the funding for the highest scoring projects as a baseline and funded projects in the recommended years, being the recommendations by MassDOT, I should clarify, based on project readiness and also fiscal constraint. This initial scenario established 13 new projects for funding by the MPO, but after those projects were selected, still left $134.5 million of funding availability, namely in fiscal years 2024, 5, and 7. That availability is what has informed the development of the final scenarios under discussion today. It also introduced the bike share support line item for funding between fiscal year 25 through 28 at $1 million a year, and a $1.5 million project design pilot for fiscal year 2025. Its key difference from scenario number 3 was in the funding of project 608158, the reconstruction of Canton Street in Westwood and Norwood. This project scored higher than certain other projects which were not selected for funding in this scenario, and was programmed because that project is also at a 25% design level. I will discuss that further in draft scenario number 3, which did not include this project, as to why it was not initially considered there. But namely, if we move on to the next slide, we can look at kind of what that funding breakout that has informed subsequent scenario development has looked like. Much of the remaining funding as part of this development was identified in fiscal years 24, 5, and 7 in the amount of $32.8 million in 2024, $30.7 million in 2025, and $50.3 million in 2027. I would also flag as well that 2028 did have funding availability remaining in it, but traditionally the final year of a constrained TIP generally has a much larger amount of funding left over afterwards in order to support additional programming of TIP projects in future TIP development cycles, in this case being fiscal years 25 to 29. If we can go on to the next slide, we can do a quick overview on scenario 3, which did not necessarily inform the development of scenarios 4 and 5, but just to kind of explain some of the thought process here. The cost effectiveness scenario focuses on, still prioritizes the score of a project, but on a dollar per point metric that factors in project scoring, but looks a little bit more closely at fiscal sustainability. The primary difference between this scenario and scenario 2 was that this scenario initially funded Bellingham's roadway rehabilitation of Route 126 project. That project scored similarly to Westwood's Canton Street project with a lower budget, but was not at a 25% design and therefore was not ready to move forward for fiscal year 2028. However, more on that later. If we go on to the next slide, we can just see how scenario 3 would have looked. As stated, this did not necessarily form scenario 4 and 5. So if we go on to the next slide, we can look more at just the high level review on what these 3 scenarios look like. Both scenario 2 and 3 programmed funding for 13 new projects as a baseline, but scenario 2 left $134.52 million in total remaining funding, and $142.6 million remained in scenario 3. Both scenarios left the same amount of early year funding in federal fiscal years 2024 and 2025 at $63.5 million. As baseline scenarios, really to inform today's discussion, none of these scenarios included new projects funded by MassDOT or projects proposed by the MBTA, which we will get to shortly. If we can go on to the next slide, we do have some additional updates that have emerged since the March 16th meeting. Namely, at previous board meetings, staff provided updates on the Independence Greenway Extension Project in Peabody, which is project number 609211. When staff relayed this update about estimated project cost increases, that estimated increase was initially approximately about 33% up from 3.9 million to 5.2 million, but has since been revised upwards further from that $3.9 million figure in fiscal year 2024 to a $7.5 million budget. In addition, another project on the Independence Greenway in Peabody, this time one program in fiscal year 2025, has also seen an increase. This is project 610544. which is the multi-use path construction of the Independence Greenway at I-95 and Route 1. This saw a cost increase from $6.3 million to $15.1 million, which is about a 140% increase in cost. We do have some folks from MassDOT's Highway Division here today who may be able to speak to the drivers on that cost increase for this project, should there be any questions there. But I should mention, these cost increases are already factored into scenarios 4 and 5. And if you review the scenario tables posted in advance of this meeting, these projects and any others that saw significant changes or additions will be highlighted in yellow on that sheet. Moving on, if we go to the next slide, we can talk about the MBTA projects that were presented at the March 16th meeting. There were 2 MBTA projects currently programmed in the fiscal years 2022 to 27 TIP. These are the Forest Hills Station project, which is currently programmed at $6.4 million in fiscal year 2024, and the Lynn Station project, which will be carried into the 24 to 28 TIP for $13.6 million, in addition to funding already in fiscal year 2023. As was presented at the March 16th MPO board meeting, the MBTA has requested that the MPO consider funding 4 new projects, which are ready for construction as early as fiscal year 2024, effectively shovel ready in that regard. I should also mention that these 4 projects would be federally funded in full by the MPO for the amounts shown on screen and are not funded in the MBTA's capital investment plan otherwise. Needless to say, if the MPO does not select these projects for funding, they would not be funded by another source, at least one that has not been identified yet. In order of cost, these are the Mass Ave Station Accessibility Project at a requested MPO contribution of $35.4 million. This is a project to support an Orange Line Station state of good repair project and accessibility project to elevators and escalators at Mass Ave Station, in addition to a new head house at the exits of the station near Carter Playground and the Gainsborough Garage. The Jackson Square Station Accessibility Project is for another Orange Line station at $21 million in request. Similarly, it is a state of good repair project, which would improve accessibility at Jackson Square Station from its existing elevator, in addition to the installation of a new elevator, make repairs in and around Jackson Square's facility, which is located in Northeast Jamaica Plain, neighborhood of Boston, and also would improve lighting inside of the building. In that same area, to jump ahead one line on this table, is the Columbus Avenue Bus Lane Phase 2 project at a request for $9.4 million. This funding would better integrate safety for all users multimodally into the extension of dedicated bus travel lanes along Columbus Avenue from the current terminus of the lanes at Jackson Square northward through Roxbury Crossing into Ruggles Station. And then for the third project on this list is the $11.2 million early action items project for rail transformation at the Wilbur Interlocking site, which is near the Anderson Woburn stations and also Reading Station. This project includes the additional turn track and signal improvements on the Lowell and Haverhill lines, and will enable the deployment of potentially reduced headways for commuter rail service on the Haverhill line down to 30 minutes from a current weekday express headway of 40 minutes. With that, if we go on to the next slide, I'd like to go into a little bit more detail on MassDOT projects that are up for consideration for funding. MassDOT operates a statewide highway program that also appears in the MPO's TIP alongside the MPO's regional target funded projects. Many of the projects under consideration today are currently funded in the TIP through the statewide program, and MassDOT is requesting that the MPO support these projects by taking them on with regional target funds instead of those statewide highway funds, which gives, given the funding availability present in the scenarios discussed today. These projects fall within the traffic safety, shared use path, and major bridge state of good repair project categories, which are the areas that the MPO has traditionally voted to fund projects through in the past. If the MPO chooses to fund a MassDOT project and assume or alleviate its current financial obligation, MassDOT would generally use that freed up capital to support investments elsewhere within the same kind of project type. For example, if the MPO were to fund a traffic safety project currently funded by MassDOT, MassDOT would then use that freed up availability to seek other safety projects to fund within the region. On the subject of safety projects, if we go on to the next slide, the safety projects that are under consideration implement the strategies of MassDOT's strategic highway safety plan, namely the goals towards a Vision Zero approach to eliminate serious and fatal crashes and improve the safety and mobility of all users within the state's transportation system. If we go on to the next slide to look at the 3 projects up for consideration, these projects fall within fiscal years 2025, 6, and 7. The first project is currently funded in fiscal year 2026 in Medford with statewide highway funds, which is an intersection improvement at Main Street and the Mystic Valley Parkway and its ramps. This project is a top 200 crash intersection, meaning it is one of the highest crash frequency locations within the Commonwealth, and also incorporates multimodal investments to incorporate safety for all users. The second project in 2025 is a targeted safety improvement project in Chelsea. While this project is currently programmed in the TIP for statewide highway funds in 2025, it was evaluated by MPO staff and scored 83 out of 134 points during a previous TIP development cycle. The project includes bus lane and multimodal accessibility improvements along Broadway in Chelsea. Third project is actually a project that is not currently funded in the TIP. This is a targeted safety improvements project for Everett on Route 16 for $4.7 million, which would provide for an initial improvement to the area to act as a foundation for the development of future multimodal facilities along Route 16 in the project area. If we go on to the next slide, just to provide a brief overview on multimodal facilities, the next project category refers to shared use path projects, which support the expansion of the existing trail network and close gaps in the Commonwealth's bicycle network and pedestrian accessibility system. This is designed to increase the percentage of people that have access to high comfort bicycle facilities to make a variety of different kinds of trip. There are 7 projects that are up for consideration here. If we go on to the next slide, and they fall between fiscal years 2025 and 2028. The first 2 in 2025 are currently funded in the TIP and range in cost from $4.4 million to $3.3 million, being the shared use path connection for Route 28 and the Wellington Underpass in Medford, and Natick's Lake Cochituate Path, which is distinct from the Cochituate Rail Trail project currently recommended for funding in 2028 that staff received a project application for from Natick. The next projects are the Revere Beachmont connector at $5 million and the Danvers Rail Trail westward expansion for gap closure at $2.9 million. There's then Sudbury and Wayland's Mass Central Rail Trail section at $4.1 million, and the Medford South Medford connector bike path at $7.9 million. All 6 of those projects are currently funded in the TIP for state highway funds. However, the 7th project is not yet programmed as it is recommended for 2028. This is the Osceola Street path construction over the Neponset River in Boston, Milton, which is a DCR proposed project that would connect neighborhoods in Mattapan over the river via Osceola Street into the Neponset River Greenway on Milton's side. MassDOT anticipates that this project will receive Project Review Committee approval in May. For the last investment category, if we move on to the next slide, and before we dive into the modified scenarios, are the major bridge projects. These are state of good repair projects that target bridges on the national highway system with the intent of hitting performance needs for poor deck area and number of poor bridges. According to the current capital investment plan, the Boston region represents a little over 40% of the total backlog of investment towards bridge state of good repair across the Commonwealth. If we go on to the next slide, we can look at the 3 bridge projects that are under consideration. These are all major bridge investments currently funded by MassDOT that are seeking contributions from the MPO. 2 of these, project 606496 and 606728, being row 1 and row 3, involve the Bowker Overpass and Ramps project near Storrow Drive and the Mass Pike. Both projects would improve accessibility for pedestrians and cyclists along and near to the structures, improving access to the Charles River and Esplanade, in addition to the realignment of the interchange to potentially open up the Muddy River and access to open space along that section of the Emerald Necklace. The combined financial request between those two projects, which could be split into multiple years, was $179 million. Similarly, the second project on the table, which is the I-93 Bridge Preservation Project in Somerville from Route 28 to Temple Street, is a $175 million project for fiscal year 2026 that incorporates corridor improvements to improve the area for adjacent residents. With that, and in summary, if we go on to the next slide, I should also mention that in addition to requesting MPO funding to buoy these projects, MassDOT is also recommending that the board leave a safe amount of target funding unprogrammed in each fiscal year as a contingency to cover inflation risks on planned and currently programmed projects across each of the fiscal years. With that, without further ado, that takes us to the modified scenarios. So if we go on to the next slide, just to do a quick refresher on community connections, as discussed earlier in this presentation, going into scenario 4 and 5, there only remained about $23,000 left in the set aside of $2.5 million for community connections funding after the Metro West, Lynn, Medford, and Canton projects were recommended for selection. While no other community connections projects were initially recommended, given the constraint of that set aside, there remained room in fiscal year 2024 through other funding mechanisms to support these investments, including the $15,000 for Acton's parking management system, which fit within that $23,000 remainder. The fourth scenario, if we go on to the next slide, which is the fiscal sustainability scenario, reflects a more conservative approach to financial investment, including in funding projects in federal fiscal year 2024. It builds upon scenario 2 to fund most of its projects in 2028, specifically with an eye towards holding more funding as reserve contingency. Specifically, a larger amount of funding is held in reserve for fiscal year 2027. It has come to the attention of staff that several projects initially recommended for programming in 2028 are under discussion for potential acceleration into that year, including 2 projects that the MPO received applications for funding for. It has also come to the attention of staff that there are lower total federal participating cost estimates, or TFPCs, for numerous projects in fiscal years 2027 and 2028. However, some of those projects are not yet at 25% design, and scenario 4 does not reflect those lower TFPCs in the interest of retaining that buffer as a contingency should cost increases be realized later in the project lifecycle. In the interest of long-term fiscal sustainability, not only for this TIP, but also future ones, this scenario also realigns the balance of advanced construction funding for the McGrath Highway project in Somerville, allocating an additional $15 million to 2027, such that the amount of AC occupying outer years of the TIP for 2028, 2029, and 2030 may be reduced to accommodate more projects in future TIP development cycles. This scenario funds 17 new projects, but keeps about $80.3 million in reserve as a contingency and to potentially fund projects that could accelerate into fiscal year 2027 should they achieve the necessary readiness thresholds. As a reminder, if there are cost overruns on currently programmed projects, this contingency would accommodate those overruns without risking delays for projects due to fiscal constraint in a given year. If we go on to the next slide, just to cover the MBTA projects first, this scenario is actually largely the same for MBTA projects as scenario 5. These changes include the removal of 1 project and the programming of 3 new ones. The first change is the deprogramming of the Forest Hills Station Improvement Project at $6.4 million in 2024. This project is not able to move forward due to a lack of funding from other sources outside of the TIP. And there are some folks from the MBTA here today who may be able to answer questions regarding why that change happened. That said, for the new projects, there's the programming of Jackson Square in full in both fiscal year 2024 and 2025 at $21 million split, with $8 million in year 1 and $13 million in year 2. This also funds the $11.2 million for Wilbur Interlocking in Reading in fiscal year 2024 and the Columbus Avenue bus lanes in 2024 at $9.4 million. This leaves about $12.3 million or 9.4% in fiscal year 2024 to cover inflation or cost increases for current projects. Earlier in this scenario, I mentioned that it is a little bit more risk averse from a fiscal standpoint with this increased buffer, but it also assumes some policy items that have changed, which I will get to on the next slide. At $12.3 million in fiscal year 2024, there is funding availability and bandwidth to accommodate additional smaller scale investments in that year. Scenario 4 has the same 7 new community connections projects as were discussed earlier in this presentation and at the March 16th board meeting, including the reprogramming of the Acton Parking Management System project. Scenario 4 did not originally fund the Blue Bikes e-bikes projects requested from Cambridge and Boston this year, about $1.35 million between the two, due to concerns regarding the agreement of the Blue Bikes General Counsel on the readiness of implementing e-bikes into the system. It is now the understanding of staff that the Blue Bikes Council has reached an agreement on incorporating these investments in fiscal year 2024, based on a letter of support submitted to staff this morning from the General Counsel for consideration by the board. That letter has been posted to the MPO calendar for review. Scenario 4 originally programmed an additional $1.5 million on top of the $1 million bike share state of good repair set aside in fiscal year 2025 to accommodate that investment in the near future. But given this new information about the readiness of these projects to proceed, there is some flexibility for acceleration of the e-bikes projects into fiscal 24 rather than the set aside in 25. With that, to go into some of the larger scale projects, Scenario 4's fiscal sustainability line item does not fund any larger scale projects in the further out years of the TIP. As stated, it does increase the bike share state of good repair set aside in fiscal year 2025 to $2.5 million for that year only, going down to $1 million in each subsequent year, 2026 through 2028. It also includes the $1.5 million project design support pilot program, which would be subject to an application process and board approval like all other project applications. This also includes $13 million for the Jackson Square project to fund it in full for fiscal 25, as stated, $8 million in 24, 13 in 25. But in order to maintain sufficient amount of contingency in 2025, the $6.5 million set aside allocated to that first year of funding for the transit modernization program has been reduced to $3.5 million to reflect that increase in MBTA commitment, financial commitment, I should say, for MBTA projects. That said, the $3.5 million remaining would not compromise the ability of the program to support investment requests from RTAs or for any transit signal priority project requests in this coming autumn. For fiscal year 2026, this scenario follows a similar pattern to scenario 2 and also scenario 5, and that it funds the Cambridge Street Bridge project in Charlestown. If we go on to the next slide for a deeper dive on fiscal year 2027, scenario 4 does not fund any additional projects on top of scenario 2, but does fund Malden Spot Pond Brook Greenway project and rebalances the advanced construction schedule on the McGrath Boulevard project. This is a rebalancing of funding for the project, meaning it does not add new funding on top of the project schedule, instead adding $15 million to 2027 by reducing the financial balances in 2029 and 2030 to open bandwidth in future TIP cycles in the out years. This programs the project at $35 million in 2027 and $30 million in 2028, within a longer-term advanced construction schedule in the non-constrained years of the TIP at $20 million in 2029 and $17.37 million in 2030. That will be discussed during the 25-29 TIP and 26-30 TIP. If we go on to the next slide, for fiscal year 2028, this scenario still funds the same 3 projects as scenario 2, being the Cochituate Rail Trail Extension in Natick, Wakefield's Envision Wakefield Downtown Transportation Improvement Project, and the Westwood Norwood Canton Street projects. The latter 2 projects are actually subject to ongoing discussions between MassDOT staff, MPO staff, and project proponents with regard to potentially accelerating them into 2027, should various project readiness and design concerns be addressed in the near term. With that, if we go on to the next slide, I mentioned acceleration here as we kind of look at the remaining funding balances across all of the fiscal years in scenario 4. On the next slide, scenario 4 shows that it leaves about $32,520,154 as reserve funding in 2027, which represents about 21% of total overall funding. That funding was left unprogrammed to serve as contingency, but also bandwidth to accelerate projects that are ahead of schedule or on track for advertisement within fiscal year 2028. The reason being, if we go on the next slide, fiscal year 2028 only has $13.6 million of program funding, and that is less than what is usually kept in reserve by scenarios for the final year of the TIP. The reason why there is less funding in fiscal year 2028 than usual is due to advanced construction on currently programmed projects without compromising the opportunity to fund new projects in fiscal year 2028. This funding, if we go on to the next slide, should any projects that are currently in 2028 be on track for acceleration into 2027, this would fill the funding availability in 2027 while also opening up that availability in fiscal year 28 for the next TIP development cycle, for that kind of long-term fiscal sustainability strategy that this scenario aims to address. To look at more short-term gains, though, in terms of performance measures, the next slide takes us to the last scenario we have to discuss. Scenario 5, the performance measures scenario, relies on scenario 2's scoring prioritization as its base. It funds the largest volume of its new projects in fiscal year 28, but also more aggressively funds projects in 24, 5, and 7. The scenario's name, performance, refers to its intent to address major performance measures and MPO objectives such as improved safety for all users and state of good repair in the near term by funding more projects. The scenario funds 22 new projects compared to the 17 of scenario 4. I should mention that 2 of those are those e-bikes projects that were not initially factored in for scenario 4, but also holds less funding in reserve at $52,545,831 across all fiscal years for contingency. That ranges from about 5.6% to 9.6% of funding in a given fiscal year. If we go on the next slide, just as with scenario 4, scenario 5 deprograms the Forest Hills project due to insufficient funding from other contributions. It also funds the same 3 new projects in fiscal year 2024, being the Jackson Square, Columbus Avenue, bus lanes project, and rail transformation early action items. The construction funding schedule for Jackson Square is slightly different in this scenario than in scenario 4, and that it funds more of the project at $11 million in 2024 versus $10 million in 2025. This also leaves $7.9 million or 6.1% in fiscal year 2024 for cost coverage. If we go on to the next slide, there are 9 community connections projects that are programmed in federal fiscal year 2024. This continues obligations to ongoing shuttle projects, programs 1 new shuttle pilot project being the Metro West Catch Connect project, includes the reprogramming on the Acton parking management system, but namely directly programs as separate line items $1,372,575 in fiscal year 2024 for e-bike procurement for Boston and Cambridge as part of the Blue Bikes network. As stated, these projects were not initially considered in scenarios 2 and 3 or scenario 4 due to fiscal constraint in the existing set aside, and also concerns regarding the policy side with regard to the readiness of the Blue Bikes General Council to accommodate these investments in fiscal year 24, a concern which has recently been sort of alleviated. With that, if we go on to the next slide to look at 2025 more closely, this goes into where MassDOT funded projects begin to emerge. This includes the bike share state of good repair set aside, still at $1 million for each year between fiscal years 25 and 6. However, it does ratchet up to $2 million a year between fiscal years 27 and 8 to reflect increased investment there. it also retains the $1.5 million of the project support design support pilot. As mentioned previously, the Chelsea Targeted Safety Improvements Project, which scored 83 out of 104 points, 34 points, and was evaluated in a previous tip cycle, has been selected within this scenario for programming by the MPO, not only given its benefits for how it performed in scoring and also equity benefits, but also with regard to the fact that the MPO did not receive any applications this year for intersection improvement projects that had gone through MassDOT's project review committee. Therefore, this project would serve as a way of funding additional safety investments within the TIP and would not otherwise happen. In fiscal year 2026, due to fiscal constraint, there are no other projects programmed outside of the Cambridge Street Bridge project in Charlestown. In scenario 5, I'm sorry, on the next slide, oh, we're on the right side, sorry about that. For the newly programmed projects in fiscal year 2027, there's still Malden Spot Pond Brook Greenway project, but also the Everett Targeted Multimodal and Safety Improvements on Route 16. This is that project that is not currently in the TIP and would be requested for funding at $4.7 million for near-term multimodal enhancements, and includes a one-time $15 million MPO contribution in federal fiscal year 27 for the bridge replacement Storrow Drive over Bowker Ramps project. This would be $15 million in 27 only and would not cover the full budget of the project, nor would it be a seed into 2028. And just as with scenario 4, scenario 5 also incorporates the rebalancing of advanced construction for Somerville's McGrath Boulevard construction project, adding $15 million to 27 and reducing by $10 million in 29 and $5 million by 2030 to sort of front load the budget and alleviate long-term fiscal constraint in 2029 and 2030 in order to fund more projects in future TIPs. And lastly, for federal fiscal year 2028, there are still the same 3 projects in 28 as was seen in scenario 4, being Natick's Constituent Rail Trail Extension project from the MBTA station at Natick Center to Mechanic Street, and also the Envision Wakefield project in Wakefield and the reconstruction of Canton Street. As should also be noted, as mentioned in scenario 4, those 2 latter projects that are currently up for consideration for potential acceleration would not be able to do so in this scenario, as programs, as we go to on the next slide, much of the funding across each of the fiscal years of the TIP. As is illustrated by this slide, and if we go on to the next one, this scenario 5 holds less contingency in the near years of the TIP, around 5.6 to 6.1%, or $7,933,300 in fiscal year 24, and $7,177,169 in fiscal year 2025. On the next slide, we can see that there's also the less than average reserve funding in federal fiscal year 2028. Again, this scenario is more aggressive in making near-term improvements in order to satisfy performance measures. This leaves about $12,609,626 for projects in 2028, or 8.0%. And if you look at 2027, you can see that there's $14,942,040, which would not be able to accommodate any accelerations of projects out of 28 into 27 without compromising a significant amount of contingency for that year, especially as projects move forward in design. If we go on to the next slide, there is a still kind of at a high level, that 7.5% contingency across each of the fiscal years that is maintained by funding more projects today, but would likely result in less projects funded later in subsequent TIPs, especially after factoring in cost escalation on any contracts. So it's a little bit, incorporates a little bit more risk into its scenario. To put scenario 4 and 5 next to each other on the next slide, you can see that right now, scenario 4 funds 17 new projects with enough for 2 more in 25, as was discussed regarding the e-bikes, versus 22 in scenario 5, with total funding remaining for contingency of $80.31 million in scenario 4 versus $52.55 million in scenario 5. In the near term, there's much more contingency for near-term inflationary concerns in scenario 4 at $24.3 million versus scenario 5 at $15.11 million. Both scenarios fund the same number of new MBTA projects, but scenario 5 is the only scenario that funds new MassDOT projects, including the Everett project, which is not currently funded in any TIP or program. With that, if we go on to the next slide, this shows the next steps of the TIP. This is the final discussion really regarding scenarios before a scenario is adopted, such that it may inform the last few stages of development in the TIP in advance of its release on April 20th for public review. Throughout the month of May, staff will be continuing to engage the public, not only as part of the 21-day public comment period, but various other outreach measures, such that by the June 1st MPO board meeting, there will be a vote to endorse the final TIP. And to reiterate, as part of this discussion, at the end of this discussion, staff are requesting that the board votes to approve one of the two scenarios presented here today, scenario 4 or 5, for incorporation into the TIP. With that, if we go on to the next slide, I'd like to open up to discussion.
Thank you, Ethan. Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to tip my hand as to which one I'm going for. You mentioned that we might be able to get a little bit of explanation for why there are the large increases towards Greenway project.
Yes, yes, with regard to the Independence Greenway project, I think we may have some folks from MassDOT Highway who can speak to that more fully. The initial Independence Greenway project that was presented at the March 16th board meeting was the result of those additional multimodal safety enhancements and also inflationary pressures on certain materials, and I believe also drainage concerns in the project area.
Okay, well, that's actually good enough for me. So it's inflation and also kind of scope expansion, which it seems to be something that we're seeing a lot of, and for good reason, and so I'm definitely much more in favor of the fiscal sustainability scenario number 4, because I really think we need to keep money on hand, especially in the near term. Because we're just seeing projects go up in cost like a minimum of 30%. So we don't want to have a situation where we have a project in the TIP and then we can't fund it. So those are my thoughts at this point. Always happy to hear what my colleagues on the board have to say. Thank you.
Jay Monty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ethan, I got to hand it to you. That was an impressive presentation. You didn't miss a beat. That was a lot of information. And a lot of presentations, so fantastic job. I guess if I'm leaning towards one scenario, it would be probably the performance, and I would just say that the addition of the Route 16 project in Everett is really huge for us. It's transformational. This is a corridor that it's a busy urban arterial roadway which has some of the highest crash clusters in the state. It's also one of the biggest growth areas in the state. We have several thousand new housing units being constructed as we speak, right there, with thousands more to come, with the Silver Line, which opened in Chelsea, right nearby, and hopefully extended into Everett across Route 16. So it's really imperative this project, grow some legs and move forward. And we've been working with MassDOT and their staff to do that. So I'm really excited to see it here, and I hope we'll be able to keep it in the TIP. And I also appreciate the ability to add the blue bikes, e-bikes component to this. And I understand that under the community connections, there wasn't room for it. But I do think it's an important piece of maintaining our system and providing that last mile connection to so many communities. And lastly, I'll say, there's some great projects here from Medford, both under Route 28, but also some safety projects. And I think in the spirit of performance, I would have liked to have seen those in there as well. So maybe that could be reconsidered. And as far as I know, Len, you made a good point that we aren't leaving as much money on the table for cost increases. I think in the near term, in the first year or two, that should be less concerning, because these hopefully projects that are in the final stages of design, we hopefully wouldn't see major cost increases. I do think probably is a concern in the outer years, perhaps. But it's certainly not in 24. I don't think it's something we need to be critically worried about. Thank you.
Brian King? You're muted, Brian.
Thank you. Just want to echo what Jay said about great job, Ethan. The only slight criticism is it's Peabody, not Peabody. But you know, you'll learn. I just want to also agree with Len on supporting scenario 4, and I think we need to keep as much powder dry as we can in these uncertain times. So, Peabody, thank you.
Eric Barassa.
So I too want to thank Ethan. That was a tour de force. It's very complicated. There's so many, moving pieces here. I think that was a good overview and sort of evolution of kind of, how things have been developing over the past several weeks. I guess I'm more leaning towards scenario 5. I hear what folks are saying about wanting to leave more unprogrammed funds. My worry is that we won't find projects for those funds in the near term. And I kind of agree with Jay about, I hope in the near term, we have a better handle on cost. And I also feel like we need to get more projects sort of moving through the highway design process and kind of get them going and get attention, and they don't really get that attention if they're not on the tip. And I know it's a balancing act because when we have the cost increases and we have to move things around, but I don't know. I feel like there's more potential for us to be able to solve some of those problems. I feel like we're seeing an issue where we're not getting enough good projects in the pipeline right now, and so that's something I'm concerned about, and it's one reason why I'm sort of leaning towards scenario 5.
Thank you. Robert King.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Again, hats off to Ethan. I've only been part of these discussions for a short period of time, but really impressive presentation, and appreciate the amount of detail that goes into it. He's done a tremendous job. My main question, obviously, I'm gonna look out for Brookline here, and it's just a question for my own edification. Originally, we were looking at 30 million under the fiscal scenario that goes down to 28. We've seen that in some of the previous presentations in past months. And under the performance scenario, that drops down to 26. I've pushed the design team from Time Bond to make sure those numbers didn't come from them. I'm just trying to understand from my perspective, what drives those changes? What is staff seeing that are potential opportunities that we should be aware of? Obviously, we're going to do everything in our power to protect the budget that was originally identified and still have a transformative project for the community. But I just want to understand those swings because they're substantive. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you. So that was one of the projects, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, where there were projects identified that had total federal participating cost decreases, or rather budget estimates through MassDOT's project info system that were either identified early, but were not factored in. So in the scenario 4 situation, it uses the older budget estimate from the February MassDOT tip readiness days analysis, which is that higher figure, whereas project info is currently showing a lower estimate. The reason scenario 4 goes with that higher figure is such that should, as part of the design process, a higher budget need to be realized, that way it doesn't need to be increased again after the fact. It basically bakes in more contingency to that individual line item there.
Got it. Thank you, Ethan.
Matt Moran.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Again, Matt Moran here with BTD. So just wanted to promote scenario 4, and also just wanted to highlight 2 projects that we've been working on closely with the MBTA as a true interagency partnership. That would be Jackson Square and also the Columbus Phase 2 bus lane project. Both of those projects, and I can speak firsthand to the Columbus Phase 2 especially, are going to be ready to go next year, and we see these as being instrumental in not only helping Boston, but also helping regional transit improvements. So just want to strongly support these 2 projects and their inclusion, and thank you for their consideration.
Jim Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Matt covered a lot of the transit projects pretty well for the city. Just on Rutherford, I know, a couple meetings, or not a couple meetings ago, a couple weeks ago at the last meeting, I had suggested moving Rutherford back up to 26. And we have since submitted a revised schedule that we're confident in to MassDOT. I think that is pretty solid as far as it potentially moving up to 27. I realize we have further discussions, our work cut out for us to to not only meet that, but even ideally move up to 26. I just wanted to remind everyone that, we were at 25% design, and, I think we were approached by the secretary and the GM and with, from other cities as well to consider a redesign of the whole project. It's obviously a very complicated project, a very important project, one we've all been talking about for a long time. I do think that the new redesign, the new approach to the project is going to be for the better. I think it's going to be a fantastic project, but obviously we have to kind of keep the pace, and hoping that we can find some efficiencies in our schedule to try to move Rutherford up. Maybe that's a discussion for next year, but I just wanted to reiterate that I think the city's confident that we could meet an earlier year for starting Rutherford. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Dennis G. and Betty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick question and a couple comments maybe. Are there any design monies programmed in any of the years? And the reason why I ask that is that it kind of addresses the issue that Eric talked about, is the pipeline. There's a lack of projects. I suspect in years past, if we had all this unprogrammed money, there'd be people knocking on our doors trying to get their project programmed, and yet we really don't have a lot of municipal or local projects being advanced in that case. So my question is are there any design monies in any of the years, and is there any thinking about increasing those if there are monies, so that we do address the pipeline issue?
Ethan?
Thank you. So both scenario 4 and 5 incorporate that $1.5 million project design pilot line item that would provide funding for municipalities that have received review committee approval from MassDOT to advance their design using federal funds. That being said, as a pilot program, the specifics of that program have not yet been ironed out, nor have any potential projects, and is still subject to continuing discussions. The reason why that funding is at $1.5 million and only in federal fiscal year 25 is effectively pending the outcome of that pilot. If it goes well, then there is a possibility that it could be expanded, but we have to see.
I guess what would 1.5 million buy us? I mean, it would be half a project. I mean, if of any significance, right? I mean, I just think we need to address that. We have, I look at what we're confronting, and it highlights a real major problem with pipeline. And what we have here is lots of dollars, and what we're doing is we're looking at projects that were not prioritized by the T, and we're looking at projects that are funded by the state, in statewide things. And so I just see that as something that we're not addressing in a pilot of I think is small monies, that we should try to at least enlarge that pilot and give more teeth to it and more priority to that. Because if you look at the projects that we're funding, there's also a real regional equity issue here. I mean, most of these dollars are in the inner core of significant volume dollars anyway. So I think because we don't have that pipeline, it does put a bias to a regional inequity to it. So anyways, I have those comments. I'm concerned, and I think that we should somehow address design elements this year where we have money, so that we put some teeth behind trying to address the problem, because it is a significant problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dennis. Leonard Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, got a little noisy here. So I'm hoping that the 1.5 million, I guess it's more than half a project. I mean, I think it's design monies. It might go a lot further than the one project, but if I'm wrong about that, I'd like to hear. I mean, because actually that was how I was going to address Eric's concern about about the pipeline, is that we did have that pilot program that I was thinking that might help municipalities in designing projects and building the pipeline. And also I want to address what Jay said about having less concern about overruns in the near term. My concern is actually the big overruns that we're seeing in the near term. If I am recalling some of the cost increases that we've seen lately. So there's that, and the last thing is a question. Actually, hold on a second. I'm sorry. Can you all hear me clearly?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, all right, fine. Thank you. So on the kind of principle about replacing like project with like project, if we were to take on a MassDOT program, I guess I'm kind of trying to understand the rationale for that, because it seems like if we want to have a diversity of projects, we might not want to replace like with like. Do you understand my question? Because if I were to do another example, it was like for like geographic diversity, if MassDOT took a project, let's say, in Arlington, well, the MPO wouldn't necessarily want to replace. The MPO wouldn't necessarily want to replace it with another Arlington project or add another Arlington project, because we're losing geographic diversity. So if you're saying, you're going to fund, we're going to take one of your safety projects and then you're going to replace it with a safety project, that might decrease diversity of projects that we, as a whole, fund. So maybe that's addressed to you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I think, Glenn, the concept is sort of, if the MPO funds a bike path project, let's say bike path project, right? The MPO doesn't necessarily want to do that and then have the state fund a bridge project. The MPO actually wants to be additive to the bike path project network, right?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And so that was our assumption. We are happy to engage in discussions about if that's a good policy or not, but our assumption is if the MPO takes something off our list, they're looking to be additive to that type of project, not they just picked a project at random.
Yeah, okay, I understand the rationale. I was just making sure that's what it was. Okay, thank you, appreciate it. I'm all done.
Gene Manning, I see you, but I'm calling on members first. I will call on you at some point though, so just keep your hand up. Ken Miller?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things. One, I think it makes a lot of sense to move, for example, McGrath. I think that I agree that makes a lot of sense to move that funding forward if you can, just freeing up money in later years rather than funding perhaps some other projects. And I had a question about scenario 5. So when you're talking about increasing performance, I'm trying to understand how contributing to projects that are perhaps already funded increases performance. I understand that frees up money for other things, but there's no, there's really, we don't know where that money is being spent or where in the state that money is being spent for that matter, so I'm just trying to understand that. I guess that relates, David, to what you just said about, doing like projects with like projects, I guess. But just another question about scenario 5. So it does show $15 million for the replacement of the Star Oak Drive, contribute to this replacement of Star Oak Drive over the Bowker in Boston in 2027. Could you just take that $15 million? You just add it to the graph instead. Just accelerate the payment for McGrath Boulevard. McGrath. I guess that's an Ethan question.
Ethan?
In theory, that is a possibility. It's my understanding as well that, of course, that is also subject to fiscal constraint in terms of different funding sources. I would imagine, for example, McGrath is not the only project that does have an AC schedule across multiple years. The Western Avenue project in Lynn also has that. But I think the intent is with regard to providing additional support to projects that may require it as part of scenario 5 versus scenario 4, which focuses on more currently programmed. I think it's a possibility and a variable, but it was also kind of a case of how much funding would they be able to execute and obligate in the first year of construction?
Well, again, you could obligate the whole project in the first year of construction. That's AC is just a device to sort of, if you need to help, to help spread the cost out, but you don't have to. I mean, you could obligate the whole thing in 1 year if the funding was available. Just finally to the pipeline issue. Yes, I think that's, I agree with what Eric and Dennis and Len said. I think that's a really, that's a good point. I understand, I know there's a UPWP subcommittee meeting or committee meeting this afternoon. And looking at the 2023 UPWP, I note that there's only about less than 5% of the funding is for the so-called multimodal project planning. I would suggest that looking forward to next year's UPWP and beyond, that you consider substantially increasing the amount of funding that goes towards planning studies that could result in actual project recommendations. I think that $350 is less than 5%. I think that could be increased by a factor of several times, and I think that would be helpful in addressing the backlog situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Other members? Seeing none. Gene?
Hi, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Gene Manning, I'm interim town planner in Canton. Mr. Chair and members of the board, I also wanted to thank Ethan. From the municipal side, he was tremendously helpful in guiding our town through the process, and I'm sure with many of the other municipalities and the projects here. I just, wanted to ask for the board's support on the projects we submitted. The town is in the process of trying to provide better access to our two commuter rail stations, Canton Center and Canton Junction, so that project would help. In addition to that, the town was also the recipient of a MSBA grant for a new middle school. So the project with the schools will help us provide better access. And Mr. Chair, just for the pipeline, rest assured, Ethan has been a big proponent of helping municipalities provide future projects for the pipeline. And we look forward to working with him and your board on future initiatives, not only for Canton, but regionally as well. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Manning. All right, so back to my members. I think what Ethan wants out of today is that we choose one of these scenarios or modify one of these scenarios and choose it. And we heard from I wasn't actually keeping a tally, but it seems to me like half of us like 5 and half of us like 4, and some of us like some of 5 and some of 4, and some of us like, why shouldn't we fund Rutherford earlier? And what would happen if we did that? And I forget, Dennis said, why don't we increase the funding for design pilot? None of that was all great discussion, but I think Ethan needs us to focus forward and try to get to a solution. So does anybody want to talk about any of that, or does somebody just want to make a motion on one of the scenarios, or how would you like to proceed to get Ethan what he needs? Lynn?
Don't worry, Jay. So I would like to propose that we support scenario 4, but modify it, so as to get in, I think Jay made a very strong case for his project, and there may be other projects that people want to make cases for, but just with the notion that we are going to keep more money on the table, because I am actually more concerned about the near term. And look, I like I like being bold about things. And so if we end up going with the performance one and having less money on the table saved, that's fine, as long as we are preparing communities, our proponents, that if their project gets delayed, they are ready for that, and the possible increases in costs that come from delaying the project. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you. So 4 with modifications. Thank you.
Okay, but that didn't help me. Thank you, Lynn, but that didn't help me. Forward modifications doesn't actually move Ethan. Like, do you want to add the project in Everett? Do you want to add the project in Everett plus the electric bikes? Do you want to add the project in Everett plus much more money for design? I mean, at some point, that
Okay. Well,
forward modifications, Ethan, unless we want to just tell Ethan, go off and modify 4 and come back, that won't, Ethan doesn't look like that's what he wants us to do.
well, this is when I hope that you call the next person in line, Jay Monty, who will give you the modifications. Thank you.
Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll get behind Lynn on this. If we could, I'll agree that, probably we need to leave some money on the table, but, Eric Russell also made a great point too, that I think does help with the pipeline issue a little bit, to at least get a few more projects on there to help, and I'll make the motion of the case for Everett, as well as the e-bikes and Medford, and so we can certainly discuss whether all those are doable or valid, but that'll be my opening offer.
Thank you, Brian Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this gets a little more complicated now that there's a motion on the table, but that's for you to manage. I would suggest a straw poll between 4 and 5 and sort of see where we're at.
Okay, because actually there's no motion on the table yet. Jay said he'd offer that motion when we're ready.
Okay, I misunderstood. Thank you.
I think that's what Jay said. Eric Barras.
Yeah, I mean, I'm, if members want to modify the 2, I think we could, have that discussion. We certainly have time today. I would support, adding the Everett project. I think the e-bikes project in the near term, if we were going to modify scenario 4, I'd be very interested to hear from other members about what are other projects. Although, the more we add, we start to, it starts to become scenario 5. I think what I'm hearing from the city of Boston is a strong interest in reserving funds in fiscal year 27. Seems like fiscal year 27 is potentially a compromise year between where the city and where MassDOT think the project could be ready. And I'm getting a sense that city of Boston really wants to reserve funds in 27 to be able to move Rutherford into 27. And I guess my question then is, if that was to happen, that obviously frees up, money in 28. I guess we would just address that the next time we do the tip next year. But I'd be interested in
that wouldn't free up money in 28. Starting Rutherford earlier doesn't reduce the amount of money you still need for Rutherford in 28. Right. Rutherford is a 4 or 5 year construction project, whatever it is. Don't take me my. So it would just start early. It
would end earlier.
We move 28 money into 27. We just start earlier and keep 28 money, and then 29 or 30 money, I guess, in the long term.
And what is the Medford project that Jay mentioned?
Jay, what's the Medford project that you mentioned?
I believe it was a safety improvements project. So I'll find it again here. I'm sorry. I'll have to get back to you on that real quick. I know
the Medford project, if I could, Mr. Chair,
Sure.
John Bouchard, the Medford project, and Jay, just correct me if I'm wrong. This was the safety project for the intersection at Main and South Street, Main at Mystic Valley Parkway, and Main at Mystic Ave. That was in 2026. Was that the one?
Yes.
Okay, that's 611974, and that was one of the MassDOT proposed safety projects.
And that was in the performance scenario, I believe, right?
I have to defer to Ethan. He did an outstanding job, but it was very, very hard to follow all the scenarios.
With regard to the Medford project for 2026, that was not in either scenario, as both scenarios are fairly fiscally constrained in 2026. There were no additional projects in 26 between either scenario. There's about 9.9 million in scenario 5 to program that project versus about also $9.9 million in 26 to program that project. Should that project be programmed, which if I can, I apologize, I'm looking on my own screen right now. That project's current cost estimate is approximately $7.9 million. That would only leave about $2 million of contingency in 2026. There is space, but there would be very little wiggle room if it was programmed.
Thank you. Jim Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I would like to propose a motion, I think an easy one, hopefully, which is we amend scenario 4 to include the e-bikes in 24. I feel like we have enough justification and backup, and I would think confidence that it can go in 24 and enough support. So that maybe I may be over ambitious, but I think that might be an easy thing to start with, and then we can continue discussing between scenario 4 and 5. And then I guess the second thing would just be something for further discussion, and I'm interested to hear, MassDOT's reaction on Rutherford. In past years in programming scenarios for Rutherford, we had started with a smaller amount for the first year. Obviously, it's a very long corridor, a complex project. We all know this, but at least we had done programming scenarios where we had about 9 million, I think it was, in the first year, just to kind of get things started. And a lot of staging and complexities to get the project rolling. I think we all think it could be done in phases as well. So maybe that's something, if we could do even a smaller amount in 27 for Rutherford, that would help us keep the pace on design development and approvals and advancement, and allow the project to kind of get started, maybe with a lesser scope in that first year, that first phase. So.
All right, well, you've got a motion on the table right now, so.
Correct. And I guess the first one, I think is pretty straightforward. I think it would be moving the e-bikes into 24 in scenario 4.
Right, but that does not assume that scenario 4 is the scenario we'll be using, right?
Correct. Yeah, I just, can we modify scenario 4 by adding that and then get past that?
Is there a second? I can't tell whose hand up is. Somebody who's actually wants to second this, just unmute. Eric Barassa, who asked a question about why we fund e-bikes. You want to make the second to put it in e-bikes? I'm now confused, Eric. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'll make a motion to add that to scenario 4.
Okay.
As Jim said, I mean, I'll second his motion. We can.
Okay.
If we want.
So I'm going to make a point of privilege here or something.
Thank you.
Can someone throw up a spreadsheet so we can look at numbers? Because I'm a visual learner.
Is that the kind of spreadsheet you need?
What is the implication of adding e-bikes to 4?
Right, I think you need to throw up the spreadsheet from 4 that shows how much money's left, Ethan, in each year. There you go.
Thank you.
How much is e-bikes?
So the e-bikes currently actually have roughly a set aside in 2025 at 1.5. Their total estimated budget is $1,372,000, I think, out of 24. So it would represent about 10% of what's left, roughly.
Right. It would take you to just under 11 million bucks left. All right. So motion having been made and seconded. Please call the roll.
David Muller,
Ah, God, I don't know. I like e-bikes, but I'm not a fan of 4, so I'm going to vote no.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, no.
John Romano,
John Romano, no.
Ally Clayman,
Ally Clayman, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee abstain.
Eric Barassa,
Yeah, Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Diggins, yes.
Matthew Moran,
Matthew Moran, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Claire Ricker,
Claire Ricker, yes.
Rob King,
Rob King, yes.
Tom Bent,
Yes.
Austin Siganowitz,
Austin Siganovich, yes.
Dennis Giambetti.
I have a quick question, if I could, a point of, is this the final vote, or are we gonna take more amendments later
No,
on?
this is just on this one amendment. We're not even sure we're voting on four yet.
Gotcha, okay, I was a little
Make
confused.
sure
I
that
didn't know
you
if there
guys
was
in both of them.
I didn't realize it was a main motion on the floor. Okay, thanks. Yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Christy Orio,
Christie Orio, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Okay, that motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Wait, now people still have their hands up. Jay Monty, I think is next.
Yes, so, just to be clear that we need to leave today, having made a motion to move forward with one of these scenarios. And if we move forward with number 4, it'll move forward with the amendments that we have voted on.
Yeah, sure. Yes, yes.
Okay.
Whichever one we actually ultimately move forward with, we will include.
So I will make an amendment, or I will make a motion for an amendment to add Route 16 in Everett into FY 27 on scenario 4.
And how much money is it?
Everett is, excuse me, sorry, Everett is $4,684,750 for fiscal year 27, which puts it at about $27 million left in fiscal year 2027.
And is that the inflated cost to the right year?
That is the TFPC that I received from Highway Division slides, so I can verify that real quick.
Okay.
Yes, that's the correct inflated number.
So how much, it was 4 million and change?
4.7 million.
All right, so it'll take that number down to just under 28 million bucks, right? All right, is there a second? I think that's Tom Bent had his hand up, maybe the second.
Yes, I'll second that motion.
All right, motion has been made and seconded. Please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yeah, again, because I don't support scenario 4, I'm gonna vote no.
John Bouchard, John Bouchard, are you here? I can come back. John Romano,
Romano, no.
Ally Clayman,
Ally Clayman, abstain.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, abstain.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Losing some powder here, Jay, but yes.
Matthew Moran,
Matthew Moran, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Claire Ricker,
Claire Ricker, yes.
Rob King,
Rob King, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Siganowitz,
Austin Siganovich, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Wynn,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Christy Orio,
Christie Orio, yes.
Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Okay, do we have John Bouchard?
John Bouchard is back. I'm sorry, could you just tell me what the motion was? I had a crazy dog and someone at the door.
Motion to add the Route 16 Everett project to federal fiscal year 27 in scenario 4.
Yes.
Okay. That calls the roll and that motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Dennis Giambetti, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's make a motion. If I could, I'd like to add in year 2025, I think that's what the design money was, to increase the amount of funds for design to $4 million.
Is there a second? And is this in scenario 4 or is this both scenario 4 and 5?
That, well, either, yeah, both, I guess. Well,
Right.
yes, either.
What other people have done
whatever.
is move the projects they care about out of 5 into 4. But both, your project is in both, and you wanted to make this motion for both, yes?
Yes, please.
Okay. There's a motion to increase the 1.5 design set aside to $4 million in scenario 4 and in scenario 5. Is there a second?
I will second it for the purpose of discussion, Mr. Chair, and then I have a question.
What do you want to have your question before we discuss it? I'm confused.
Well, normally just you do a second as a courtesy, because otherwise it doesn't go anywhere. So I would like to
But
see us vote on it.
Just to be clear, I think if things don't have support, you should let them die and just let them die. But what's your question?
Okay, all right, fine. No, it's your meeting, Mr. Chair. I hear you. So here's my question. My question is how much do we get? It's essentially what Dennis's question was. For the 1.5 million that we have, because his impression was that we only get like the maybe technical support for one project, and my feeling is that we get a lot more technical support for a lot more projects with that money. Do you have a sense, Mr. Chair or Ethan?
So my sense, and John Bouchard will jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, is that if you want a back of the envelope estimate, you should take 10% of a construction cost and assume that's how much design costs you. So if you're funding 1.5 million, you're going to fund design for $15 million worth of a project, which, given the way things are running today, is probably, to Dennis's point, one project. John, is that right?
Yes, yes, Mr. Mola, that is correct.
And again, that's back of the envelope, right?
And that's just to start the discussion. You're right.
Yeah. But Dennis is right. 1.5, or I think Dennis is right. 1.5 would be a pilot where you'd pilot one project to see if it worked.
Right. All right. So I got it. So now with that answer, I heartily second it.
So Derek, you have a question? Okay, go ahead.
So there is in both scenarios 4 and 5 already $1.5 million for design in fiscal year 25. What is the difference?
There's no difference in the, Dennis is making a motion to increase both by $2.5 million to $4 million.
That we increase that amount?
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So the pilot would be a $4 million pilot instead of a $1.5 million pilot.
Yeah, okay, got it.
David,
Yes, Brian?
I'm gonna ask my same question as before. I'm lost.
Okay.
I'm being honest with you.
So this is the scenario 4 on the screen.
Okay.
Dennis is taking $2.5 million out of that $11.9 million overage to fund additional design pilot. So that would leave roughly 9.4 million. Can you, whoever's controlling the slides, can you move forward to the scenario 5 for a second so we can do the same thing? Again, in 25, Dennis would take $2.5 million, which would put that one at, if my math is right, roughly 4.6 left.
And there's no cascading changes across the other years?
No,
Okay.
because it's only a pilot for 1 year. It's a 25, it's a pilot starting in 25. It starts in 25 because to Ethan's point, we have to figure out how to even do this and how to select the projects you would actually fund as a pilot and all of that stuff.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this motion? Motion hasn't been made and seconded. Please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yeah, since this is on both of them and I support this idea, I'll say yes, since I want to see it in 5.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
Yes.
Ally Clayman,
Ally Clayman, yes.
Sarah Lee, all right, I can come back. Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Matthew Moran,
Matthew Moran, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Hey, Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Claire Ricker,
Claire Ricker, yes.
Rob King,
Rob King, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Siganowitz,
Boston Steganowitz, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Chris Diorio,
Chris Diorio, yes.
Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
And do we have Sarah Lee to vote? Okay, well, that calls the roll and that motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other motions, comments, questions, concerns? Eric Grassa. Oh, wait, Eric, before you talk, Eric, I think Jim Fitzgerald, back when he made his original motion, had a question on Rutherford for the Highway Division about whether we think it could be possibly ready in 27 or possibly 26. John Bouchard, do you want to talk about it? You want me to talk about it?
I can talk about it, or I can allow you, and I can support and reinforce, whatever you'd like.
Why don't you talk and I'll support you, John?
Okay. Well, you have been taking all the heavy hits here. MassDOT is working with the city on Rutherford Avenue. We're supporting the city in a phasing plan, with accelerated reviews. And, our biggest concern working with the city is that because of the complexities is we would, we want to support the project, but in accelerated reviews, but it's been about complete submissions and getting all the issues and resolutions out on the table so we can support that. So we're supportive of the city for Rutherford Ave and their phasing plan and accelerating our reviews to help deliver that. As long as we can continue to work in partnership, we see that as being a scenario we could certainly work towards in 2027.
All right, so now Eric, again, answer Jim's question, Eric.
So that was my, that actually was, I was interested in coming back to that. And given that there is, we're looking at scenario 5 funding in front of us right now, correct?
Yes.
Given that there's 15 million in 2027, is there enough funding there, David, to, if Rutherford does.
You have pointed out a terrible flaw that I let start in this process. Because we're working off 2 scenarios, we actually should have done what Brian asked for originally and selected a scenario to be, because now we've got some of our amendments in scenario 4, but they're all actually all part of scenario 5 anyway.
Yes.
We need to choose whether we like 4 or 5, because if we choose 4, then we have to go to 4 and look at the 4 slide. If we choose 5, we can look at the 5 slide. We've already started amending 4, so when we go look at the 4 slides, you'll have to remember that we've amended it. But I think really we need to choose 4 or 5 as a starting point, and either add or take stuff away. I think to get to your question, I think it is the city who would have to give you an estimate of how much money they think they'd be able to obligate in phase 1. Although because it's now phased, generally speaking, if it was a single project, we could just program what we want in year 1.
Yeah.
If it's phased, they need to actually probably be the one who gives us an estimate of what they think we should program. And again, as John said, MassDOT is supportive. We're supportive of moving it to 27. They've got a lot of work to do. We're committed to doing our part. We think 27 is a place we could land.
Okay. Because my biggest concern about scenario 4 is that we leave a lot of unprogrammed funds in 24 and 25. And I'm concerned that we're just not going to have any projects ready for that, and we're going to be back here next year with a lot of unprogrammed money doing this sort of same thing over again. And so that's why I like scenario 5. I think it strikes a good balance. I think the city of Boston didn't like it because of where Rutherford is and this funding issue, but maybe based on this conversation, they feel more comfortable with it.
Other questions, comments, concerns? Lynn Diggins.
Well, I was going to make a motion to take scenario 4. Yeah, I'm listening to what Eric said. I guess I just want to have some sense of what's the likelihood we'll see overruns for 24, in 25. But I think if we knew the answer to that, it would be easy for us to make a decision here now. Let me think about this some more. I'm not going to make a motion right now. Thank you.
Okay. Jay Monty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I apologize. I got a little more information about the Everett project, and it seems as though it may have been programmed using statewide funds for 2025 separately of this. I'm wondering if maybe MassDOT can just clarify what, because we're not seeing that on the tip. I don't know if John maybe could just clarify.
Could you
that.
repeat the question, please, Jay?
So I just got some other information suggesting that the Everett Route 16 project is programmed on using on the statewide program for FY25, which I think is separate than this process. So by putting it in 27 on the tip, are we essentially taking it out of statewide funding, putting it on the tip, but actually delaying it 2 years?
To my knowledge, and I will look this up while we're, just defer for a moment to see where it was programmed. My knowledge from my notes that it was programmed in 26 in statewide, but was going to be extremely difficult to deliver in 26 statewide.
Okay.
And I wouldn't want to overcommit to the region at 26. So that's why we considered 27 to be a better year that came out of readiness. But let me review my notes and I'll confirm that before we move on. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, before we move on too far.
Dennis Giambetti, your hand is up. Is it still up from when we had our discussion about the?
Yes, it is. Sorry.
Okay,
Sorry.
no worries. That's all right. That's not at all. Lynn Diggins.
Okay, I've thought about this. I've listened to you and to Eric. I'm hard pressed to go against either of you because of your experience. And given that we can amend the tip if necessary, I'm hoping that we're going to keep a really close eye on these projects in the near term years. And if they start going up in cost, we can amend and let municipalities know what's going on so that they're not put in a bad state. So I'm going to make a motion that we adopt scenario 5.
Okay. Is there a second? Eric Barras?
Yeah, I'd second that motion. I'd also like to get clarification on, Jay's question, but I don't know, maybe we could take a vote. I don't know. And maybe Derek has information about that too.
If I could to respond, and then I can defer to Derek. That project was not programmed in a prior year, Jay. It was statewide 27, and we were recommending 28 because through readiness days, again, we were recommending 28 because of a couple of items and getting the project fully developed. And as part of the last few months since readiness days, we feel we've clarified a few of those concerns and that we could support staying in 27, and that's why we would propose it to the MPO.
I think,
thank you, John.
wait, but I think we're confused. I think we're talking about maybe two different projects. Jay's asking about the Everett project, right?
Yes.
And so that's in 28 or 27?
It's in 27 statewide.
Okay.
So I guess one additional question, John, is if it was not shown on the tip, it would still get funded through statewide funds.
I'm sorry, clarify that, please. I missed.
So if it's not shown on the tip and funded with federal funds, you're saying it would be funded through statewide funds anyway?
It was being proposed to be funded with statewide federal funds.
Got it. Okay.
Not regional.
Federal, okay.
Funds.
Ethan LaPointe. I have a motion on the table, Ethan, but I'm assuming this is around that issue. Go ahead, Ethan.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For just a point of my own edification here, the project that is being referred to here, I think, is project ID number 613121. Is that correct?
That's the one in Everett, Ethan.
Route
Yes.
16, yes.
Okay. I just wanted to confirm on that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to adopt scenario 5, but I don't think it's to adopt it as the final. it's to make it the one we're gonna work off of, right? Because I think we still want to have the Rutherford discussion and the other discussion that people want. Is that correct? Or is this motion to just adopt it and be done?
Well, Mr. Chair, if I may,
Yep,
it was stated as the motion, to decide, to just determine to be done. But I would like to make it clear that I would like it as a starting point, for discussion, and then we can have another motion perhaps to, adopt it or not.
is that okay with you, Eric?
Yes, that's fine.
All right, Jim, do you have a comment on this before we go forward?
Yeah, I would just agree that I think with the motion of kind of, I guess maybe it's more eliminating scenario 4, right? Is maybe the more appropriate motion. Is that fair to
Yeah, I mean,
say?
in effect, it's the same thing. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
This motion is we are now no longer going to talk about 4. And the
Yeah.
2 projects that people omitted into 4 are already in 5, right?
Gotcha. Yep.
So now we're going to talk about 5, and people can either move to take things out, or move to move things around, or move to put things in, or move to fund Rutherford. But
Yep.
we will at least have one thing, and it is, Ethan, this is the one that's on the screen now, right? This is 25. I mean, scenario 5. Brian, answer my question. No, you didn't have a question, Brian, go ahead.
If I could, David, if I could. So my question is, what's the difference in the regional highway target funds remaining between scenario 5 that we're considering now and scenario 4 as was amended?
Okay, that's harder because there's not a slide that shows it, but we will help you. So this is scenario 5, right?
Yes.
Roughly speaking, $7 to $12 million remaining in a given year, or I guess 14, $7 to $15 million in a given year, $52.5 million over the 5-year period. Okay. Do you want to write these down or anything before we move it off the screen? All right. So that's scenario 5. Ethan, put scenario 4 back up for a second. This is scenario 4 before the amendments. Okay. We added into 24 roughly $1.3 million and change for e-bikes. So you would make that, just round numbers, $11 million. Okay. We also added, I thought, into 26, but maybe it was into 27, the Everett project. It was in 27, the Everett project, which was $4 million and change. So again, round numbers, just make that 28. So there's $80 million left minus 5.5. So there's, I think, 74 million and change left.
And
Round numbers.
and we did Dennis's motion as well. That was 4 million.
Right, but that applies to both of them, and that's the reduction of $2.5 million in 2025, and also $2.5 million in the total.
All right. Okay, so you're at 77 is what you're telling me?
Yeah, I think so. Round
How does
number.
that- 70, and how does that compare roughly to 5?
Yeah, I think it's actually this. So this one is 80 minus 2.5.
71.5.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, because it's 2.5, it's 4.5, and it's 1.5 roughly.
Okay. And can we go back to 5?
Yep.
With Dennis's amendment in mind and just,
Is instead of 52 and 52.5, it's 50.
okay. And so just so I'm clear, we're basically voting on whether to leave 71.5 on the table or 50 on the table?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, as a starting point. Again, people can make motions to take stuff out or add stuff in or fund Rutherford, so. All right, so we have a motion to work off of scenario 5, and it's been seconded. Please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Ally Clayman,
Ally Clayman, yes.
Sarah Lee,
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassi, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, no.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Matthew Moran,
Matthew Moran, no.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Hey, Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Claire Ricker,
Claire Ricker, yes.
Rob King,
Just one clarification. This is a final vote on scenario 5, or now we are going to vote, now we're going to discuss this further.
We're going to discuss this further in case people have additional amendments to either
Perfect.
project, delete a project or whatever.
Happy to vote yes to continue those discussions. Thank you.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Siganowitz,
Austin Siganowitz, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen,
Darlene Nguyen, yes.
Chris Diorio,
Chris Diorio, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Okay, motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now, Ethan, can you put up a slide for scenario 5 that tells people sort of what's in 5? So if people want to take things out of 5 or add additional things in, they can know. There you go. So these are the series of slides, right? So is that, I think you've gone back one too far, right? Isn't that 4? I think, is this the beginning of slide 5?
There are several slides for each of the different years of the scenario.
Is this the first one? Or is there stuff in 24 that I need to know about in slide 5?
We can, if we go back.
Go back one, yeah.
Yes, there. Thank you.
Right. So the most important thing on this, 2 things on this slide is the active parking management system is in and the e-bikes are in, okay? Those are the new things that are in 24, right? In scenario 5. Ethan, jump in here and if you think you need to clarify or correct me, feel free to jump in as we go. Okay, so everybody understands. 24, e-bikes in, also active parking. If you care about either one of either one of those out, that's where you're going to make your motion. Go to the next slide. 2025, state of good repair for the bike share is now funded at $1 million for 25 and 26, and then $2 million in 27, 28. Nothing in 24. The pilot is now funded at $4 million, the design pilot. Chelsea's project is in this list now. In 26, the Boston Cambridge Street Bridge is in this list. It might also be in 4, okay, but it's here. So if you care about it, it's here. Next slide. 27, Malden Spot Pond Greenways funded, Everett Route 16's funded, Boston Bridge Replacement Storrow Drive a $15 million contribution to that project. The rebalancing of McGrath to move more money forward, bring up money in later tip years for next tip cycle. Next slide, please. 28, these are the new projects. It's Rail Trail Extension in Natick, Envision Wakefield, and Canton Street in Westwood Norwood. And again, some of these projects may also be in 4, but since 4 is now dead, these are the projects, if you want to add them, or if you want to add something to this list, this is the list you need to be adding to. If you want to delete one of these projects, this is what you have to delete from. And Ethan, from the top of your head, please tell me the MBTA projects that are funded, I believe in both scenarios, but just in 5, so we know what we funded for the team.
Yes, the MBTA scenarios include the Jackson Square Station Accessibility Project for $21 million, which in scenario 5 is split with 11 million in fiscal 24 and 10 in 25. The Early Action Rail Transformation Commuter Rail Project at $11.2 million and $9.4 million for Columbus Avenue Phase 2.
Thank you. Now, Brian and Lynn have their hands up, so I'm going to call on Lynn first. Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not that I'm dense, it's that I like to hear John Bouchard talk. On fiscal year 27, you know, the Rutherford, where we pulled money ahead, we have to pull ahead all of that. I mean, I guess I'm just a little bit concerned that if we start like running out of money, you know, that we have some easy recourse. I mean, so I guess it's one more slide forward or backwards. I'm sorry. You know, so.
Yeah, actually, can you put, Rutherford's not on this slide, okay? So can you put the money totals? Oh.
Well, I guess it's McGrath, whichever one had the money pulled forward. I might have said the wrong project.
Okay,
so it's one that.
Go back to McGrath, then go back to the.
Yeah,
slide.
I guess it's McGrath. I mean, so we're pulling ahead. We're adding 15 million in 2027. So we have to add the entire 15 million.
No.
Okay.
That was just done by staff to free up money in outer tip years in the future because we're going to have Rutherford and McGrath both going and spending money into future tip years. And they're trying to because we had so big a balance, they're
Right,
trying
right,
to repay some of Rutherford and
Okay.
McGrath in order to free up some money in the out years.
Okay, well, as long as we have some flexibility there, I feel much better about it. Okay, thank you.
But now do go to the money slide for FY25. So I'm going to call on Jim Fitzgerald in a second to talk about how much money he believes phase one in Rutherford should appropriately take in 27. It will come out of that $14.9 million delta there, okay? Unless we delete a project or unless we go back and change the stuff Lynn was just talking about moving forward money in McGrath. We actually don't have to do that if we don't want to, but when Jim talks about how much money, those are the options if indeed we're going to do this project in 27 instead of starting it in 28. Jim?
Thank you for that tee up. And, you know, I appreciate hearing from John, kind of on the fly here, just trying to fly the plane while I'm building it. But, you know, our previous, in our current tip, we had 8.6 million for the first year of Rutherford. So someone smarter than I probably realized that made sense as a first infusion of resources. So I guess I am making I suppose it's a motion that we add 8.6 for Rutherford in 27. And obviously we have multiple years beyond this current tip of, I think it's 35 million kind of is the suggested amounts beyond for 28 and then beyond. So I think my motion would be for 8.6, going back to that previous kind of cash flow scenario for Rutherford that had been in, I think probably several previous tips where we had 8.6 million in the first year. So that would, based on that logic, I would recommend that scenario.
All right, so I have a motion on the table. So if you're not wanting to second the motion, put your hand down and then I will take comment on the motion after I get a second. Is there a second? Eric Barassa.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Discussion. Brian Kane.
Thank you. Okay, looking at my chicken scratches here.
Yes.
I'm just thinking how we used to do this. You at this point, you would walk up to a big projected bunch of numbers and start pointing to stuff. So I miss those old days. I guess I would ask if we do this again, can we have someone just put up an Excel spreadsheet where we can actually look at stuff in real time as it changes? So that's my first question for you as, I guess, a member privilege question or whatever.
Well, so let me answer that one.
Two. Okay.
Let me answer first. I, like you, I find those days easier. So taking, you and Ethan should think about whether it's possible to have a big spreadsheet projected at some point. I mean, Ethan provides it to us offline, but if it could be, you know, even as an appendix that he doesn't have to go over, just in case we ever have to go back and refer to it, some of us would appreciate that. You know, some of us who are visual learners as opposed to thinking on the fly would appreciate that. So think about that for the next set of tip go rounds. Brian?
Thank you. So I guess my only caution here, and this is where we get into this thing where these are all really important, great projects that are currently needed for which there is just not enough revenue. I start to look at the percent unprogrammed at the bottom of this slide that's up here. And I start to get nervous when we start dipping below 10%. We're not even at 10% anywhere on the proposed side. And this would bring the proposed number even lower. And I, you know, getting back to the discussion we had earlier, the way construction costs are going up, everybody who's in municipal construction or deals with municipal projects knows this. We're going to need more money in 27, 28. And this is why I liked 4, but I lost that vote. So I guess I'm just going to appeal to folks here. We got to leave something in the till because we all know these projects are going to go up in cost. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Matt Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to sort of further emphasize what Jim was saying, I think Rutherford Avenue is an incredibly important regional project. Now with bus network redesign and our sort of work with the T on that, we know that there will be buses that will be using this in the future that will serve, Everett, Medford, further points north, and then head down Rutherford to connect into Cambridge. So I just want to put it out there. This is an incredibly important regional project, and this money, I think, will go a long way towards helping that construction move ahead. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Matt. Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Brian, I hear you. I understand where you're coming from completely. And what made me change to scenario 5, was what Eric said about unprogrammed monies, and then we have to scramble. And when I was looking at the list of MassDOT projects, I was like, how am I going to choose among these? I have no rationale for choosing one over another. There's a little paragraph on the right-hand side that gave me a little narrative that was helpful, but it wasn't like we had these things scored like we do our projects when we're choosing them. So I would like to see us avoid getting to that. And so when I said, let's go for scenario 5, I said it with the proviso, that we're going to keep a close eye on things. As we see costs overrunning, we can shift, we can amend the TIP, and we can let the municipalities know what's going on. So it's just going to be incumbent upon us, to keep a close or even closer eye on things. So that's why I can go along with scenario 5 and adding the 8.6 million for Rutherford in 27. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. Robert King.
Again, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm going to be selfish here and just speak up one more time about Brookline's project. So we saw in scenario 4 us go from 30 million to 28, which is a 3.5% reduction. Now we're talking about scenario 5, which is a 14% reduction. I love all of these other projects that are being considered, but when, as Mr. Kane indicated, we're already below 10%. I don't want to be in a situation as we move towards 25% design where Brookline has to come back to this body to justify where our project costs are. And now there's potentially less available to support our project. So if this were to move forward, I would ask for consideration that our budget be restored to the number that is reflected in scenario 4.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Bent.
Mr. Chair, I was just, I'm trying to understand, there's a lot been going on today. With what Jim is proposing for Rutherford, how does that affect, the rest of the numbers? And how would that affect McGrath?
Right, so as of now, the proposal on the table is to fund Rutherford $8.6 million in 2027. Since there was no motion to change any other costs from anybody else's projects or move any projects, that 8.6 would be funded out of the $14.9 million surplus remaining in 27. So everybody else's project would stay exactly as it is in the TIP, and we would just reduce the surplus by that amount of money.
Okay, all right. So, all right, I just wanted to make sure. I wasn't sure if we were grabbing here for there.
Yep.
Thank you for that explanation.
John Bouchard.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask Mr. King, he asked about the cost on Brookline. Are you referring to Washington Street, just so I can keep my notes straight?
Yeah, thanks for the question, John. That's correct. Yes.
So that project has not yet been submitted, other than it's at its approval stage. So in all honesty, the budget is like it's from a napkin, and I'm not implying that the designer hasn't done a detailed engineering analysis, and the town hasn't as well. But MassDOT hasn't got to 25% yet, and as we shape the scope of work, I would expect the cost may change. But we're going on scenarios at this point. A project that has not yet been submitted through through a design portal through MassDOT is really a wish, kind of a wish list kind of project at this point. So I sympathize and I support the fact that you want to make sure that your project is properly programmed in scenarios, but at this stage, and this very esteemed body looks at 25% submission, at least we have something, and we have a scope, and we have a cross section, and we can better assess the cost. And so, we will continue to work with the town and your designer on that project as it moves through the design scenario process. But I think it's, I don't want to insult you or your designer, but the numbers are kind of again, don't want to insult, but it's a napkin number at this point until I've seen something specific in engineering for my team.
Understood. I think when I look at some of the other projects that are in that same FY 27 year, they look like they may be that same level of effort. So again, I'm just advocating for the town, but I appreciate.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think it's a great project as well as many of the others on here, and we will continue to work with you and, as I said, your designer. But I think we're arguing, we're discussing a couple of dollars, even though it might be in $2 million increments on something that we don't have specific numbers really yet. That's all, Mr. Chair. Sorry.
Thank you. Matt Moran, you have your hand up. Is it up? Do you want to make a comment or is it still up for board?
No, Mr. Chair, sorry, that was a technical thing.
No worries. All right. And Tom O'Rourke. And this is on the motion on Rutherford.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to echo the concern about reducing some of these excess funds that we're going to have in the outer years. I think it will limit our flexibility down the road as we look to maybe, I know we talked earlier about trying to move some projects up. If there are projects that have the ability to move up in the future, I think this could jeopardize them. So and again, with the cost of everything going up the way it is, I think we need to really be mindful of leaving the money out there for unforeseen circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, in my opinion, it feels like the cost overrun cushion is most important in the first couple of years of the TIP, because that's at the time as a project's getting close to advertising, that's when we start realizing these cost overruns. So I know we're eating away at the cushion for potential overruns in 27 with what I'm proposing, but my opinion is that it's more important to leave a decent cushion in the earlier years of the TIP. And I mean, I know that scenario 4 leaves more in 24 and 25, but it's only a few million more. So again, my opinion is keeping a cushion in those earlier years is more important, I think, than the later years, because a lot changes with projects even moving up or back as far as they're starting. So just want to add that opinion.
Thank you, Jim. Derek Cravat, you have something on the Rutherford issue?
Yes, yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit of perspective that there are now, I think, 3 pretty large projects that are advanced constructed or programmed over multiple years between 2027 and 2028, those being McGrath Boulevard in Somerville, Rutherford Ave, if it goes into 27, and then Lynn Western Ave. So just thinking about this flexibility issue, I think it's maybe more appropriate to think about it across multiple years as opposed to just within a year. As Ken mentioned earlier, we have advanced construction as a device to provide some of that flexibility. So I just wanted to add that perspective and maybe alleviate some of the concerns that folks are having of just thinking about it as 1 year, as we have that device to spread it across multiple. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Any other comments on this before we take a motion on a vote on the motion to fund Rutherford Phase 1 in 2027 at $8.6 million? Robert, do you have one more thing to say on this, or?
Yeah, one more item, Mr. Chair. I would just propose to make an amendment to adjust the Washington Street project back to its original dollar amounts that is properly reflected in the TIP based on its history. I understand there's more detail to follow, but I think that is the right answer given some of the other movements that we're considering.
So just so we can discuss it, I need to know what year it's in and how much money you would want to add to the Washington Street project.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. So to adjust FY 27 from the $25,888,631 back to the number that is reflected in scenario 4, which is an increase of $3,106,000, $3,106,636. So
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. So Ethan, before I ask for a second, can you explain to me why a single project has two different funding amounts in two scenarios? I'm totally lost and confused about how it is that one project can cost the different amount in two scenarios.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So to reiterate from the start of this presentation, scenario 4, as the fiscally conservative kind of scenario, baked in total federal participating cost changes for projects in the near years of the TIP. The logic being that the ones that are in the outer years of the TIP that are not yet far enough along in various stages of design, so in this case, pre 25%, would see additional changes in possibly either direction as they move through their life cycle. Scenario 5, however, factored in those cost increases for projects across all 4 years of the TIP. This meant that the Washington Street project, in this case, has its most up-to-date, I would say, TFPC figure of around 25.8 million there, whereas scenario 4 has the figure from, I believe, February that was provided that is a little bit higher.
Right, but so this is very important for me to understand. So scenario 5, the lower number, is the current MassDOT estimate.
Yes.
Okay. So someone at MassDOT took the original estimate and said, yeah, this project isn't really going to cost 28, it's going to cost 25, and changed our estimate, the MassDOT estimate.
Yes, that is what I pulled from Project Info.
Okay, because that's, yeah, again, okay. So Brian, do you have a question? Are you seconding this motion?
I have a question.
Okay.
So just so I'm clear, the Washington Street project in Brookline that Mr. King is discussing has been scored and gone through a full scoring process. And the other projects that we're talking about have not. Help me understand where the new stuff is coming from relative to the old stuff. I get the price differential, but I don't get the scoring differential.
Yeah, I don't think there is scoring differential, right? Or is there, Ethan?
I think I might understand what Brian may be asking. So this Washington Street project was selected as part of the 23-27 development cycle, as was my understanding is Rutherford and McGrath projects. So those have already been scored and are currently programmed in the TIP versus other projects that are under discussion. For example, the Bowker Overpass project or the Everett project or this rebalancing of AC on McGrath Highway. Those are new changes, effectively new items that have not yet been evaluated.
Right, but the only difference for the Brookline project is the money, right? It either was scored or wasn't scored, and the scores haven't been changed, and it's the same score it had last year, and scenario 4 and scenario 5 have the same score for the project. The only difference between the two is scenario 4 has what was, let's say, the original number, and scenario 5 has the updated number, which is $3 million less, or $3 million and change.
So, Mr. Chair, again, through you, just to follow up, I don't understand, based on everything that we've been saying today, how projects are going to go up in cost in the out years. MassDOT is now suggesting that this project is going to go down in cost. Help me square that one, please.
Right, okay, so to use John Bouchard's phrase, it's a napkin. I would say, conceptual estimate, but so it's not that someone looked at engineering details and said it's $3 million less. Someone, I assume the project manager, looked at it and said, this isn't a project of this type, this scope, this place isn't $28 million. It's really 25. And they put a new number in our system. I'm not quite clear why the original number got in our system. Like, I don't know. John might be able to help me here. I don't know how a project since pre-25 has a new project info estimate, but our current, maybe my own staff can help me. Our current estimate for the project is the lower estimate. Derek Schuster, can you help me here?
Yeah, took a minute with the unmute. So I think if we're talking about Washington Street and Brookline, 610932, the higher number that was last year was at a 16% inflation factor versus 12% this year for the same estimate amount. So when that happens, if there's no change to, if there hasn't been a submission like John Bouchard was saying, and we're going off of the same TFPC as a year ago, but 4% less, that's why the cost would seem lower today than we were expecting a year ago. We can't defensively estimate what the adjusted TFPC is if there's been no design progress update, at least in our systems, on that TFPC. So I think that's what's going on here.
Excellent. So just to clarify for everybody, there's a design estimate. Let's use round numbers. That design estimate is $10 million. We get that estimate in 24. If we program that estimate in 28, we add 4 years at 4% inflation, we add 16%. Nothing's happened on that $10 million project in design readiness. So we still say it's 10 million, but now we're a year later, but we haven't moved its date. So now it's only got 12% inflation. So it looks like it's $4 million less. It's still $10 million. We just, there's 1 year less of inflation because nothing has happened in the year to change the cost, but we're 1 year closer to actual delivery.
What?
Okay.
So, that doesn't make any sense, Dave.
So yes, it does.
Project still costs 10 million and inflation goes up, not down.
But here it is, Brian. Project costs $10 million in 23. Okay. And in 23, we program it in 27. Okay. We're adding 4 years worth of inflation, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, right? Project, now we're in 24. We say project is still a $10 million project because we haven't gotten any new estimate. It's still a $10 million project. But we also haven't moved it back a year. We still say we can deliver it in 27. So now it's 3 years worth of inflation have to be assumed instead of 4.
Okay, I don't get it, but that doesn't mean we can't move forward because the project still gets done in 27 and inflation still goes one way. But I'm not going to get this today, so never mind.
Okay, and so we have a motion. We still don't have a second. Is there a second on the motion to increase the cost of the Brookline project by $3 million in 2027? Matt Moran, are you making a motion, seconding this motion, or you have a comment?
I am seconding the motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Motion having been made and seconded. Please call the roll. Okay, now, wait. So this is an amendment. I got to clarify here. This is an amendment to the City of Boston's amendment.
Oh.
So.
I was hoping, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I'll put my hand up.
Yes, Lynn?
I was hoping we take these separately because I mean, I'm not supporting, Mr. King's motion, but I am supporting the Boston one because for the life of me, I don't understand why we want to add to it because it's like it doesn't help the cause at all.
But I think this is still possible. Okay, here's what I believe happens, and if somebody's better at Robert's rules than me, tell me. The motion was made to amend the amendment. If that amendment fails, the original amendment is still alive. We're not voting on the package.
Okay, all right, fine.
We're voting on the amendment to add an increase in cost to Brookline's amendment to Boston's amendment.
Okay, if it's not a package, I'm fine. Okay, I misunderstood you, Mr. Chair.
If I'm wrong, please tell me before I screw this up. But I think that is how this works, right? There's been somebody's moved an amendment to an amendment. We're going to vote on that, the amendment to the amendment. If it passes, then we have to have a vote on the entire amendment. If it fails, then we go back to the original amendment. Okay? So this vote is to amend Boston's amendment to add a $3 million increase in 2027 to the Brookline project. The end result is the $8.6 million of Boston. This $3 million change would be added on top. So instead of reducing the 14.9 by 8.6, we'd reduce it by 11 and change. Okay?
That makes sense. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Brian.
Can we hear from Rich Benevento?
Sure, Rich. Assuming he's actually the designer on this project. Sure, but if he only wants to talk about design and all that stuff, I don't need to hear it. But
I'm
Rich,
gonna make a bet that he knows what he's talking about.
Rich,
Okay, no, I'm not going to talk about any design stuff, Mr. Chairman. I do want to talk about the budget for the Washington Street project in Brookline.
thank you.
So during the funding request phase, the PIF phase, an order of magnitude estimate was completed for the project. And it's looked at major items. It looks at linear foot cost. It looks at a bunch of different scenarios to develop what the funding request value is going to be, because we know that when we're going through scoring and things, project cost comes into whether the MPO is going to support a particular project or not. We may recall, I think it was last year or the year before, that Eric Barraza's subcommittee was looking at project costs, right? And the scenario for project costs moving forward. I think one of the things that was discussed, I recall being part of some of that testimony, was that, federal highway allows a 4% rate of inflation on projects. We recognize that by the time Mass DOT gets finished adding all of their add-ons at the end, whether it's police details or construction engineering or all of these other things, these projects are going up by almost 30%, right? So, the original close to $30 million estimate for the Washington Street project in Brookline was based on a number of different factors. Mr. King is correct. We're in the process of completing the preliminary design phase right now. And as we know, with every submission, the project cost is going to change. It's going to change from the original funding request. It's going to change at 25% design. It's going to change at 75% design when it's even more refined. And it's going to change at 100. And then finally at PS&E, we'll know what it is. And then the shocker at the end is whatever the contractor's bid on the project is actually what it's going to be. Right. So it could be, it could be a $30 million project. The contractor's bid on it. It comes in at 23 million. Conversely, it could come in at 40 million. Nobody knows that. So I think the question earlier by Mr. King was, how are these numbers going up and down? And I understand the whole issue of the federal fiscal piece of this and all of that. Federal participating costs, sorry. But I think just moving it around, is it going to change? It's definitely going to change. To drop the price of the total project. Again, knowing this project, I would assume that this project is probably going to go up more than it's going to go down. But I thought I would just provide a little background as to the original cost during the funding request, which, by the way, was a few years ago at 30 million. Would support that, you sort of leave it kind of where it is, because it is going to change and it's likely going to go up. So I hope that was helpful.
Thank you. So on the motion to increase the Brookline project by $3 million in 2027 by amending the Boston motion, please call the roll.
David Muller,
No.
John Bouchard,
I'm very confused, so I'm gonna vote no.
John Romano,
John Romano, no.
Ally Clayman.
Ally Clayman, no.
I believe we lost Sarah Lee from Massport, so I'll go to Eric Barraza.
Eric Barraza, no.
Brian Kane,
Also thoroughly confused, but voting yes, so we have more cushion in the out years.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, no.
Matthew Moran,
Matthew Moran, no.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, no.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, no.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, no.
Claire Ricker,
Claire Ricker, yes.
Rob King,
Rob King, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Siganowitz,
Austin Siganowicz, yes.
Dennis Giambetti.
Dennis Giambetti, no.
We also lost Darlene Wynn, so I'll move to Chris Diorio
Chris Diorio, no.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, no.
Okay, I believe that motion does not carry, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now on the original motion from the city of Boston to add $8.6 million for Phase 1 Rutherford Avenue into 2027 which would reduce the $14.9 million surplus by a like amount. Please call we've had a motion in a second, so please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Ally Clayman,
Ally Clayman, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
Matthew Moran,
Matthew Moran, yes.
Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Claire Ricker,
Claire Ricker, yes.
Rob King,
Rob King, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Saganowitz, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Chris Diorio,
Chris Diorio, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Okay, motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now, are there any other motions to this scenario to add, delete, or change the schedule of a project? Brian King.
I don't have an amendment. I have a question. Is this,
Okay.
is it appropriate?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so there was reference earlier to taking money away from Acton. Is the same thing happening? How does that relate to what's programmed in 24 for Acton? That's my first question. And then my second question is, what's the cost of the Chelsea project in 25?
Yes, so Acton is in this project. That $15,000 for Acton is in 24, and I believe any other Acton project that was in 5 or 4 is still in this scenario. Is that right, Ethan?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Acton project that's being referred to is the $15,000 for the Acton parking management system in fiscal 24. What happened there was unrelated, really, where the project was actually programmed in fiscal year 2022 in a previous tip, but was not able to execute and obligate its funding. In that tip, it had $20,000. It is being reprogrammed so that it may now execute given new staffing changes at the town. So they have the capacity to do so.
And it's in this scenario.
Yes, it's in both. Well, this one, yes.
Brian's other question was about Chelsea. What was your question? How much does it cost? How much does the Chelsea project cost, Ethan?
The Chelsea project is $6,315,013 in fiscal year 25.
Thank you. Any other questions or any other amendments? Brian, can you have your hand up?
I was going to move that we accept scenario 5 as amended.
Thank you, Brian. Is there a second? Lynn Diggins.
I happily second that motion, Mr. Chair.
Ethan, before we vote, you've got everything you need after this vote. Is that right?
Yes, my understanding is that this is scenario 5 with Rutherford Avenue at $8.6 million in fiscal year 27.
Yes. On that motion, please call the roll.
David Muller,
Yes.
John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
John Romano,
John Romano, yes.
Ally Clayman,
Ally Clayman, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Brian Kane,
Brian Kane, yes.
Leonard Diggins,
My favorite meeting of the year, yes.
Matthew Moran.
He had to leave.
Oh, got it. Jim Fitzgerald,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
Jay Monty,
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis,
David Kozis, yes.
Claire Ricker,
Claire Ricker, yes.
Rob King,
Rob King, yes.
Tom Bent,
Tom Bent, yes.
Austin Saganowitz,
Austin Saganowitz, yes.
Dennis Giambetti,
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Chris Diorio,
Chris Diorio, yes.
and Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Okay, motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Ethan, one correction, don't forget the other change was to take the pilot from 1.5 to 4.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so that change happened in both scenarios, so that's in here too. All right, any other? Brian King,
I move to adjourn.
Well,
Good business.
okay, that takes precedence over anything else. My next item was member items, but that takes precedence. So there's a motion and a second. There's a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second. Higgins.
It's been made and seconded. I would remind everybody, there is a UPW committee meeting after this.
Yes.
So.
Sorry.
Motion having been made and seconded. Oh, Derek, come on, you have something you want to say?
Yes, I did just want to say, I think we're gonna push that until 1:15. Streleka just sent around an email to committee members, but I wanted to say it here just in case everyone knew. Thank you.
Yep,
That's all.
motion. John Romano, you have something you need to add? Because I do have a motion in a second to adjourn.
No, just a quick, what were the dates of the next meetings again? I missed that at the beginning.
13th and the 20th.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Motion have been made and seconded. Without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Bye-bye.
Great job, Ethan, and everybody else.